Welcome to Buddhism Seeds, a place where we return to peace together amidst the chaos of modern life. Tonight, set aside your worries and lay down the burdens that have clung to you all day. Join me on a very special journey, 3 hours of ancient Zen stories, to gently guide your mind into deep sleep, soothe your stress, and nourish the stillness within. I know today may not have been easy. Loud conversations stacked, responsibilities, thoughts, spinning endlessly in your head. They cling to your mind, making sleep feel out of reach. But tonight, you don't have to fight them. You don't have to force yourself to fall asleep or try to silence the noise in your head. Instead, let me lead you through old Zen tales where time stands still, where your mind can let go, where each breath gently returns you to yourself. Each Zen story is a seed of stillness buried deep in the soil of ancient wisdom. As you listen, these seeds will quietly sprout in your heart, soothing the unseen scratches of the day and carrying you to a peaceful realm with no struggle, no rush, nothing left to achieve, just you, your gentle breath, and the soft night holding you like a mother's embrace. So lie down softly, close your eyes, release your tense shoulders. Let these gentle words carry you away from the storms inside. And now, let's begin our first Zen story. That evening, the garden behind the monastery looked as if someone had laid a thin veil of silk over it. The last sunlight no longer glared, leaving only faint gold streaks across mossy stones and the rim of the old well. A wind chime on the porch stirred lightly, making a sound as thin as smoke, enough to awaken the feeling of time slipping by in tiny drops. Amid this still scene, a young novice sat curled on the steps, brown robe, neatly folded eyes shaded by his lashes. In his palm lay a small leaf. That morning, it had been a fresh green under the Bodhi tree, trembling under the dawn as if breathing for the first time. Now it rested still, fragile as a vanished whisper. Its veins showed clearly in the fading light, so delicate the boy feared even his breath might shatter it. He lowered his head and let out a long sigh, as though something unnamed had slipped from his chest. Why did it have to fall? Why must everything end? The thought rose silently, but as distinctly as the sound of a drop falling into a deep well. He looked out to the garden. Other leaves still clung to branches, thin yet proud. A few blossoms were closing like soft farewells. A small line of ants was carrying crumbs between cracks in the stone. Everything moved very slowly, as if time itself hesitated at his question. A shadow stopped by the steps. The old monk approached as softly as wind, dark brown robe draping loosely. He said nothing, simply sat beside the boy as he always did at dusk. The faint scent of jasmine tea drifted from his sleeve, mingling with the rich dampness of freshly watered soil. He tilted his head, resting his eyes on the leaf in the boy's palm, a gaze neither sad nor indifferent, so deep it made the boy's sorrow go quiet. After a long pause, the monk spoke so softly the breeze hushed to listen. Leaves do not disappear. They return to the earth to nourish new buds. The boy looked up. A trace of wetness still lingered in his eyes, like a line on clay not yet dry. If those words were only comfort, they would have dissolved like mist. But they weren't just comfort. They dropped like a round pebble into the still lake inside him, rippling outward. He didn't answer. More questions rose silently. If the leaf does not disappear, where is it when it becomes soil? Will the new bud remember the taste of the old leaf? Is the ending he feared really just a door? The monk smiled. In his eyes, the last light gathered like a tiny star, as if he were seeing something he had known all along. He reached out and touched the leaf's edge. All life moves through a circle. He continued, voice still soft like this leaf. It was born from the earth, grew with sun and rain, then fell, decayed, and returned to the soil. And from that same soil in spring new sprouts rise. Death does not erase life. It only changes form so life may continue. A thin breeze passed under the eaves. The wind chime rang. Another leaf spun down from the Bodhi tree, turning as if choosing its path, landing gently in the boy's open hand. He startled, but didn't pull back. 2 leaves lay side by side, one still warm from the branch, the other slightly dry, its veins like little roads already traveled. They were still, but their stories were not. If you cling too tightly, the monk said, eyes meeting the boy's intent gaze, the leaf will crumble. If you let it go, it will return where it belongs. Holding or releasing only differs in how you treat the circle. The boy looked down. An ant appeared, dragging a tiny scrap of decayed leaf across the step. Pull, pause, pull, patient, as if it had done this forever. Something trembled inside the boy's chest. Where would that scrap go? Would it become part of the soil of the roots and rise again as a bud? Do the things that leave us truly vanish, or just turn down another path, returning one day in a form we don't recognize? Do you smell the earth? The monk asked softly. The boy inhaled damp soil, mingled with old burned leaves from a distant stove, pine wood and tea. That is the scent of life transforming. The leaf returns, the earth renews. Every ending carries a quiet promise of beginning. The sunlight sank lower on the well's rim. From the chanting hall, the wooden fish began to knock steadily, like the old temple's heartbeat. The boy suddenly realized he was no longer clutching the leaves. His fingers had loosened, warmth had returned to his hands. A few more ants joined the first silent as a little procession, each knowing where to go. Master, the boy whispered, if I were the leaf, would I know I am returning? The leaf doesn't need to know, the monk smiled, but the earth remembers, and spring never forgets. The boy laughed softly, a thin sound, yet enough to melt the tightness in his chest. The earth remembers. The thought was strange and tender. The earth remembers the scent of leaves, the dampness, the footprints, even the laughter of children running through the morning garden. If the earth remembers, then what is gone is still here in another way. A cloud dimmed the last light. The garden cooled. Late birds called each other home. The monk stood and held out his hand. The boy placed the 2 leaves into it. He lifted them to eye level like something precious. Tomorrow we'll bury them under the Bodhi tree, he said, where the young roots are thirsty. Every leaf returns to where it belongs, no more, no less. Master. The boy hesitated. I'm still afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of endings I can't see beyond. The monk stayed silent. He tucked the leaves into his sleeve, then pointed toward the darkening sky through the tree branches. Do you see that thin glow? The sun is setting, yet the light hasn't vanished. It's only going around the mountain's other side. Fear comes when you think the path ends at the horizon, but the horizon is only where your eyes stop, not where the path stops. The boy followed the glow, and for the first time, saw how wide the sky stretched beyond the Bodhi leaves. A feather drifted through it, turning with the wind light as a freed thought. When you stop asking why things must end, the monk said, you begin to see how everything continues. The question shifts, and so does your heart. The boy stayed silent. Memories lined up like beads, the Bodhi sprout piercing the soil in March today's lunch soup with tender leaves. The cook saying, leave the older ones for the soil moss. Growing on the shady steps, the wind sounding different through the chimes at dawn than at dusk. They linked together like little rings, pulling him from his old question onto a new road. What will I do with what is alive in my hands? The monk stepped back. Come have tea. Tea leaves are leaves too. On the tree, they catch the sun. In the water, they give fragrance. The same leaf, two ways of offering. The boy laughed aloud. As he stood, he glanced back. The first ant had vanished into the crack, the leaf scrap gone. But he knew it wasn't lost, just becoming something else somewhere else. He brushed leaf dust from his robe. The golden specks danced like tiny rain in the fading light. Before stepping inside, he paused to pick up another fallen leaf. He didn't keep it. He pressed it gently into the soil at the young roots the monk had mentioned, like sending a letter to someone he'd never met spring. At the doorway, the monk turned back. He watched quietly. In his eyes were clouds, Bodhi branches, the deepening sky, and the small shadow of a student learning to return something to where it belonged. The kettle hissed softly inside. Jasmine rose like a hidden smile. The wind chime rang again. Everything went back to its place, the leaf to the soil, the question to silence the light tonight, the sorrow to a secret drawer in the heart. So one day when opened, it won't be sorrow, but a cracked seed. Outside, the wind changed. Above, birds drifted into formation, fading into the violet sky. On the steps, leaves still clung like unspoken promises. And inside, two people sat quietly with hot tea unhurried, letting its warmth chase off the cold, slipping through the cracks. Master, the boy whispered, as if afraid to disturb what had just settled. I understand now. Yes, the monk said, thin bones warm on the table. Let that understanding rest in you. When you forget, go to the garden. The leaves will remind you. The boy nodded. Somewhere outside, a leaf fell so softly no one saw or heard, but the earth did. And as the monk said, the earth always remembers. Have you ever paused in the rush of modern life and realized everything around you is changing by the second? The faces we see each day, co-workers, friends, loved ones are quietly aging. The children we cherish are growing each hour like tender leaves drifting from old branches toward their own sky. And we ourselves are changing cell by cell, thought by thought, dream by dream. Yet we often live as if everything is permanent. We cling to people, things, moments, fearing that if we let go, we'll lose everything. But the truth is, no matter how tightly we hold, they will one day slip from our hands like the tender leaf drifting away when the wind comes. That is what frightens us endings. Just hearing loss tightens the heart. We fear losing those we love, losing our work, our youth, even our own bodies. But as the old monk said, leaves do not disappear. They return to the earth to nourish new buds. Death is not an end. It is part of life's circle. Just as sunset does not kill the light, it only changes it into something softer, deeper. Just as autumn does not destroy spring, it simply clears the way for it. In our modern world, many are trapped in the cycle of must keep, must own, must hold on forever. We pile up wealth, build reputations, clutch relationships as if they will last forever. But forgetting impermanence is why change hurts. If one day someone we love suddenly leaves, if one day our health fades, if one day our stable job disappears, we feel as if everything collapses. But in truth, they are only falling from the branch to become soil for something new. From heartbreak, we may learn deeper love. From loss, we may learn to cherish what remains. And from painful endings, we may discover gentler, calmer beginnings. One day, a young student collapsed at his mother's grave. He sobbed like a lost child. No words of comfort could reach him, only a golden leaf lifted from the ground, placed gently in his palm with a whisper. See, this leaf was once bright green, dancing in the sun, like your mother's smile. Now it lies here, but it hasn't gone. It's returning to the soil, so next spring another leaf can be just as green, just like her smile. He stared at the leaf, tears still falling, but his lips curved into a trembling smile. Because when you understand that death does not erase, only transforms fear, softens and love grows deeper while it can. In this fast world, what we need is not to grip tighter, but to value each moment as it comes, because this moment, like the green leaf, will also fall. The family meal will one day be only a memory. The tight hug today will one day be a gentle space in your chest. And precisely because everything will pass, each moment becomes precious. Perhaps what makes life beautiful is not permanence but fragility. Like the leaf knowing it will fall, trying its best to be green. Like the evening light, knowing it will fade, glowing brighter than noon. And like us, when we know each day could be our last, we begin to live fully. Sometimes, for life to continue, we must dare to let go. If a leaf clings too long, it only withers on the branch. Only when it lets go, falling to the earth, can life go on. We are the same. Sometimes, we must release what has run its course, a job that no longer has meaning, a relationship that no longer nourishes the soul, an old version of ourselves that no longer fits. Letting go is not losing, it is making space for the new. Like soil must be tilled before new seeds can sprout. Many fear letting go, thinking they will lose everything. But when we let go, we don't lose, we transform. Like the leaf seemingly gone, yet living on in sap, in new buds, in next season's flowers. So when something ends, a person leaves a chance, closes a chapter, dries. Remember the old monk's words, leaves do not disappear. They return to the earth to nourish new buds. Pause, look deeper. Perhaps under what looks like ashes, new green shoots are waiting, just needing us to be brave enough to let go so they can rise to meet the sun. Once upon a time, in one of the most prosperous and radiant kingdoms of the East, there was a monarch renowned across the 4 directions. People praised him as a symbol of bliss. Palaces gilded in gold, blazing in the sun. Treasuries piled high with jewels, elite armies kneeling, awaiting only his command. Absolute power resting neatly in his hands. And above all, he had once possessed a youth that made anyone turn to look, eyes full of fire, a proud stature, long strides, as if he had never learned to step back. Through all those years, the king never thought of time as an enemy. He lived as if youth were an eternal sanctuary, where every season was spring, and his face would never change. Each morning, attendants lifted a polished bronze mirror, and he smiled at his own reflection, a proud smile brimming with vitality. But then, the shadow of time did not knock. It slipped in like mist. One morning, as he combed his hair before the mirror, a single silver strand, cold as a thread of frost, fell from his black topknot. He froze. The next day, there were 2 more, then 3, then too many to count. The gray hairs like flecks of ice pierced his heart one by one. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, which yesterday were faint traces appearing only when he smiled, now seemed like fine cracks that could not be erased. Each time he looked in the mirror, he felt as if he were watching a stranger slowly replace him, bit by bit by bit. And the most frightening part was no one could stop that stranger. The king, who once commanded with a flick of the wrist, learned for the first time what helplessness felt like. He grew restless. At lavish banquets amid music and blazing torches, his eyes still furtively glanced at the bronze mirror at the end of the great hall, where his reflection was aging day by day. In court, while ministers bowed and chanted praises, he thought he caught a faint look of pity, or perhaps only his imagination in younger eyes. He began to fear time, to fear old age, to fear fading away, to fear that one day everything he was would exist only in others' memories, blurring, dimming, then disappearing as if he had never been. One late night when the palace lay in darkness, the king sat alone before a great mirror staring. Then he sprang up and ordered the most gifted painter in the realm to be summoned. The painter knelt before the throne and heard the decree, "Paint me a portrait, but not as I am now. Paint me as I was at 20, young, radiant, without a single wrinkle, without a single gray hair. Let me be forever thus." Terrified, the painter bowed and obeyed. The next day, in a large chamber draped in white curtains, he began to paint. For many weeks, the king did not come. But on the day the portrait was finished, he was the first to enter. When the curtain was drawn, the room seemed to burst with light. On the silk ground was the image of a handsome young man, eyes bright as dawn skin, taut, as if untouched by sun, a proud smile that could make the world bow. It was the image the king had carried with him through every step of his youth, and now it remained motionless, eternal on the canvas. The king stood silent for a long time. Then the corner of his mouth lifted, satisfied. He ordered the painting, hung in the grandest hall of the palace, where anyone who entered would have to lift their head to admire it. Yet, from the day the portrait was hung, something strange began to happen. Each morning, walking through the great hall, a vague unease slipped into his heart like a cold wind blowing against summer. That radiant painting which once filled him with pride now made him feel small. Whenever he looked at it, he no longer saw himself, but someone else. Someone who had died in the past, yet still stood there gazing at him with a distant, chilly stare. Meanwhile, the mirror in his chamber grew more ruthless. New gray hairs sprouted like weeds after rain. The wrinkles deepened each time he smiled. With every blink, the image in the mirror grew older, while the painting remained fixed forever young, as if mocking him. He began to avoid the mirror. Then he began to avoid the painting too, but both remained like two shadows clinging to him. One was a past that would not let go. One was a present that would not stop, and between them, he was trapped. At last, unable to bear the tearing inside him one night, he disguised himself as a commoner, mounted a horse alone, crossed misty fields, and rode toward the mountains. People whispered that at the western foothills lived a famed old Zen master, hidden in a simple thatched hermitage in the forest, a man whose single sentence could help the lost find themselves again. The king arrived as dawn was breaking. Fog covered the path. Tiny beads of water clung to the wild daisies along the way. He stopped before the small hermitage. No guards, no great gate, no signboard, only the tapping of a woodpecker on a dry branch and a thread-thin wisp of cooking smoke. The old master sat on the porch like a tree trunk, too familiar with storms to be afraid. He was not surprised to see the stranger. He simply looked eyes gentle as a windless lake. The king knelt on the damp ground. He spoke. One by one, he let out the sufferings hidden behind the throne. Fear of time, fear of aging, fear of watching himself wither. His words poured like a waterfall breaking upon the forest's stillness. When he finished, he bowed his head, low quiet as cooled ash. The master did not answer at once. He was silent for a long time, long enough for the first cicadas to sing in the treetops, long enough for the morning mist to dissolve, and the first sunlight to touch the roof. Then in a voice slow as water seeping into earth, he said, "If you want a painting that brings peace, do not paint yourself forever young. Paint yourself, growing older day by day." The king started and looked up. Why, the master looked straight at him, the corner of his mouth lifting as if he had heard this question thousands of times across countless generations. Because that is the truth. And only when people are willing to look directly at the truth do they stop fearing it. The words were as light as falling leaves, yet rang in his heart like a great bell at midnight. Suddenly, he understood the eternally youthful portrait did not bring peace. It was the chain that bound him to what had passed, something that no longer existed. Yet he insisted on clutching, condemning himself to the fear of losing it. When he left the hermitage, sunlight had turned the path to gold. On the way back, for the first time in many years, he stopped at a small pond by the forest and gazed at his reflection on the water. The gray strands, the wrinkles, the calmer eyes, all were there. But this time, he did not lower his head or turn away, for he suddenly saw that too was a painting being completed day by time, and for the first time, he truly smiled. There's a paradox: the more people resist time, the more time makes them suffer. They layer cosmetics to hide wrinkles, train harshly to preserve old contours, do everything to deny changes in body, face, strength, and mind, as if aging were a failure, a punishment, something shameful. But in truth, aging is simply a law of nature, not a failure. Just as summer does not lose when it yields to autumn, just as the sun is not defeated when it sinks below the horizon, just as a wave does not disappear when it merges into the sea. Yet in modern society, countless people live as if old age were an enemy. Vast industries arise to promise they can stay young forever. Defeat time, erase the marks of age. They spend enormous sums and energy to cling to an image while time quietly passes through each hair, each step, each breath. And then they forget the most important thing. Aging does not rob life of its value. It makes each moment more precious. Once someone visited a nursing home in California. Elders sat by the window, eyes drifting toward the sunlit garden. Time was etched deep into their faces, but their eyes were unusually gentle. An old woman smiled as she spoke of summers long ago, when she was young, walking her child beneath blooming cherry trees. Her voice trembled, but her eyes sparkled with a sky full of memories. That person realized that the beauty of old age does not lie in smooth skin or swift steps. The beauty of old age lies in gentleness that has replaced impatience and forbearance, that has replaced rivalry and understanding, that has replaced impulsiveness. And that is something no lipstick can create, only time. But to see that beauty requires something very simple that few manage: slow down. This world is always urging us to run. Run to succeed. Run to be wealthy. Run to stay young. And because we run, we no longer have time to look deeply at the face that ages each morning, to see that each wrinkle is a story, each gray hair a quiet victory over years of trials. We fail to see that old age is not the last station, but a new season. A season for settling, a season for harvesting life's fruits: love, understanding, peace. Like the king of old, had he paused to look calmly into the mirror, each morning he might have seen. Old age was not taking anything away. It was returning the truth of who he was. And perhaps the most important gift of aging is gratitude. When young, we live as if everything were guaranteed: health, time, opportunity, loved ones by our side. We spend them lavishly, as if they could never run out. Only when we begin to age do we realize every moment is precious. Everyone still beside us is a gift. Every deep breath, every morning we open our eyes, is a grace not to be taken lightly. And then we no longer wish to compete. We only wish to give thanks. Thanks for the days we have lived, whether joyful or sad. Thanks for the scars, because they prove we overcame. Thanks even to time, because it has honed us into gentler, deeper, more peaceful versions of ourselves. Therefore, if one day the face in the mirror is no longer the same, if the hands tremble a little, the eyes blur a little, the steps slow a little, do not panic. Do not think it is a period. It is only a comma marking the opening of a new chapter. Smile at yourself as if beholding a painting being slowly completed, each stroke of time not marring it, but deepening its beauty. Live more slowly. Welcome old age like an old friend, quiet, patient, full of stories to tell. Let each wrinkle be an old smile, each gray hair a memory fully lived. And above all, be grateful for still being here to live, to love, to continue the journey. In the end, the king did as the master advised. He had his portrait repainted, not as a forever young youth, but as himself, with changes added each year. Each year, the painter added a gray hair, a wrinkle, a touch more contemplation in the eyes. And strangely, each time he looked at that painting, he was no longer afraid. He saw himself continuing slower but deeper, no longer racing against time but walking with time. And at that very moment he truly became young again, not in flesh, but in spirit. Late in winter, the sky shrank like a gray cloth about to tear, and wind swept through the bamboo groves behind the temple with a sharp sound, like a blade lightly skimming the edge of a leaf. The garden was so still, it seemed to hold its breath. On the porch, wind chimes tapped softly against one another, each thin note like the breath of a sick person. The smell of damp earth and distant firewood smoke blended together with a faint trace of medicine that had not yet faded. At the far end of the corridor, the small room in the rear compound was lit only by a thin needle of sunlight slipping through an oiled paper window. On a faded bamboo bed, its wicker strands frayed like scratches left by time, the elder monk lay on his side. His cheeks were hollow, his nose thin, his lips dry and cracked. Each time he coughed, his fragile chest shook, creaking like an old bedstead, enduring one more gust. His breath was short, snagging in the cold air and breaking off like someone stepping down a dark staircase without seeing the next step. Everyone in the temple understood the illness had taken deep root. A whisper traveled down the corridor, slipped across the porch, slid through door cracks. Perhaps he does not have much time left. And yet, that morning, just after the dawn bell faded and the novices were still rubbing sleepy eyes, a familiar figure appeared at the turn leading to the kitchen. He was bent like an old pine forced by wind to bow. An old brown robe draped his thin shoulders, its hem brushing the brick floor each step, leaving a small rustling sound. His bony hand veins, raised and trembling with the cold, still steadily carried a cast iron pot of porridge. Steam rose, wrapping a warm mist around his collar. Meeting the winter air, it released the gentle scent of rice mixed with a hint of crushed ginger, slowly warming the kitchen space. No one dared utter a word of protest. The disciples stood silent, eyes wide, as if fearing that a hasty warning might make him drop the pot, or worse, make him drop that quiet resolve. He set the pot on a wooden bench, took up a worn wooden ladle, and poured spoonfuls of fresh boiled porridge into a glazed bowl, crazed with fine cracks. Each ripple of porridge touched the bowl with a faint ticking sound, small but clear, like time being counted drop by drop. The heat fogged his old glasses for a moment, then cleared. He lifted the full bowl. He cradled it in both hands, as one would hold a tender seedling in a winter wind. The path from the kitchen to the sick room of the young disciple was not far, but that morning each step seemed endlessly long. The rustic bricks were uneven dips and rises everywhere. A small hollow could force the carrier to stop and recover balance. Every gaze followed that slow shadow. A novice gripped his robe hem unconsciously, murmuring prayers, afraid a sudden cough might set the bowl trembling. But the elder walked with remarkable steadiness. Each step seemed pre-measured just enough, neither too much nor too little. The sick room door was ajar, cold air spilling out with the scent of still warm herbs. The young disciple lay beneath a quilt, a warm cloth on his brow, eyes reddened by fever, breath fast and broken. When the door opened, dim light from the corridor spilled in, circling the bed with a pale gray halo. The elder set the bowl on a small table. The sound of glaze touching wood made a light but decisive talk. He smiled a small smile like an ember in a winter night, enough to warm the one before him by a degree. Eat a little, or your stomach will get cold. His voice wasn't loud, but steady, like a cord pulling someone from fever back to shore. He slid a hand beneath the pillow to help the student sit up. The bony hand was strangely warm. The spoon touched the surface of the porridge. He lifted it and blew. His breath passed over the spoon, forming a small ring of steam that drifted across the bowl, thinned into the air, and vanished, but the warmth remained. He brought the first spoon to the patient's lips and waited a beat. The throat fluttered, and the spoonful went down with a sound like water passing through a narrow bend in a stream. A second spoonful, a third. The breathing steadied. In the small room, only even sounds remained: spoon touching glaze, glaze touching air, breath touching quiet. "Master," the disciple choked softly, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. "You're sick too." The elder smiled. The smile gathered the wrinkles around his eyes into dry stream beds that still reflected the sky. His gaze was gentle, like a small ember under ash, flickering enough to push back the shadows on the wall. "It's all right. As long as you still need me, I still have strength." The words fell like a bright nail into the cold floor, unassuming, yet making the room hold still. Outside, the wind shifted through the bamboo. The wind chime rang a long phrase, and then faded. In that moment, even the cold seemed to hesitate. He kept blowing, kept feeding spoon by spoon, like a mother tending a child. His hand moved with an even rhythm, unhurried. With each spoonful, his eyes stayed on the student, as if waiting for confirmation. Yes, that body is receiving it. Yes, that warmth is bridging the cold. Beads of sweat dotted his own temple, whether from kitchen steam that lingered or from his weary body, no one knew. Yet, with each breath, calm spread evenly like a thin blanket. Those at the doorway stepped back, leaving space for the two of them. Someone pressed a hand to their chest as if to feel their heartbeat. Someone else, without meaning to, grasped a truth that had always been there. Strength does not lie in muscle, nor in youth. It lies somewhere softer, deeper, in turning oneself toward another, even when one is weak. The longer they looked, the clearer the beautiful paradox became: a body at low battery, but a heart fully charged. A back bowed with age, but a spirit standing upright. The bowl slowly emptied. The fever's pink receded from the student's cheeks like a falling tide. His eyelids grew heavy, drooping, lifting, drooping again. The elder set down the spoon, adjusted the quilt edge against the draft, and smoothed the folds as if to press flat the roughness in the young one's heart. He sat a while longer, resting against a wooden chair, polished by years' eyes on the corner, where a small oil lamp still flickered, not looking into the flame, but at the quiet ring of light around it, the kind of light people often overlook. When the student's breathing had settled, the elder rose gently, the careful motion of someone gathering the last loose thread on a freshly sewn cloth. He lifted the empty bowl and turned to go. At the threshold, the wind touched his face and stung his eyes a little. He blinked, letting that sting dissolve like a light rain soaking into the ground. The corridor was long, but his steps were no longer as slow as when he came. Not because the illness had eased, it hadn't, but because the pot of porridge had already shared some of its strength with someone who needed it. He glanced back. Through the narrow door gap, the young one's figure lay in a sleep more peaceful than before. On the table, the spoon lay across the bowl's rim like a small boat just moored. Outside, the swish of a bamboo broom began in the courtyard. The daily schedule had resumed. He returned the bowl to the kitchen, washed it, and set it neatly in its place. The dishwater was knife cold on his hands, yet curiously, his palms still felt warm where they had held the bowl. The rumor he doesn't have much time left continued to drift along the corridors like winter fog that stops for no one. But that morning, for a moment, everyone witnessed something that needed no rumor, There are moments when compassion lays a bridge for a person to cross the limits of the body. And on the far side of that bridge, fear, even fear of loss, of weakness, of helplessness, retreated a step. It was still late winter. The wind was still cold. The temple garden was still quiet. The wind chime rang again, this time longer, rounder, as if warmed. Along the corridor, the brown robe's silhouette faded. No one knew whether the elder would cough more that night or lose sleep. They only knew his words still lingered in that small room, clinging to the bowl's rim, the quilt's edge, and the warmth that remained. As long as you still need me, I still have strength. The longer one lives, the clearer it becomes. Some forms of strength do not come from muscle or youth, but from compassion. That day, the elder's body was nearly spent, but his compassion was never exhausted, and it was that very compassion that lifted him beyond the frailty of flesh, carrying him through his own pain to care for someone else. Modern life often teaches that when you're ill, you must rest, prioritize yourself, and save every drop of energy for your own needs. But sometimes, precisely when pouring oneself out for another, a person discovers a source of energy deeper than the physical, the energy of the heart. And that is what reveals compassion can help a person rise above illness. A physician in New York once shared a small story that listeners never forgot. An old man with terminal cancer was nearly spent. Yet every morning he forced himself to sit up, put on his shoes, and with a cane go water the small flower pots belonging to his late wife. When asked why he didn't just rest, he smiled. "If I can still water them, it means I am still alive." Strangely though, doctors predicted he had only a few months. He lived for many more years, quietly, peacefully, as if the love he gave those flowers was quietly supporting him through each wave of pain. Love has such a wondrous strength. When the heart widens for someone, the body seems steadier. When a person can still think of others, their own pain no longer fills the whole space of the mind, and suddenly they feel stronger than they imagined. This does not mean we must sacrifice ourselves to exhaustion. It means understanding that spiritual strength can be greater than physical strength. The body may tire, but a compassionate heart can lift us up. Some people are physically depleted, yet radiate an uncanny calm because their hearts are not imprisoned by fear or selfishness. Their minds are turned toward something larger than themselves, and so their bodies seem upheld by another kind of power. The elder that year was not healthier than others, but his love for his student kept him from collapsing. That love did not make the illness vanish, but it kept the illness from being the center of his life. And that made him stronger than many who were well. In modern life, many fall not because the body is too weak, but because the mind is too tired. The more we live closed inside our own worries, the easier it is to crumble. The more we sink into me, my pain, my fatigue, my hardship, the more everything feels like it's falling apart. But when the heart turns outward, when we still care for others, it is as if we have another point of support to stand up. That is why caring for others makes us steadier. Like when a mother holds a crying child, though she is sick, she suddenly finds the strength to stay on her feet. Like when caring for a small animal, the frail elderly suddenly have a reason to get out of bed each morning. Because love is not just a feeling. It is a power that keeps a person moving forward, even when it seems impossible. Someone once asked a Zen master, "How can one stand firm on the weakest days?" The master recalled the elder's trembling hands carrying a bowl of porridge and answered, "Don't try to be strong for yourself. Be gentle for someone. For when gentle, we don't have to tense up. When gentle, we are not obsessed with whether we have enough strength. We simply do what needs to be done because someone we love needs it." And then something strange happens. That very gentleness becomes strength. Modern life often teaches us to put ourselves first, to practice self-care before all else. That is not wrong. But if we focus only on ourselves, we easily forget why we live. Caring for someone does not drain our energy. It reminds us that we are still alive, still useful, still have something worth giving ourselves to. So whenever you feel depleted, try doing something small for someone. It doesn't need to be grand, just a kind word. A cup of tea for the person beside you, a simple meal cooked in haste. Perhaps that moment will rekindle a small flame within you, like the flame that burned in the elder's eyes that day. That day after the disciple fell asleep, warm and full, the elder returned quietly to his room. No one knew whether his fever spiked that night, whether his coughing tore at his lungs. They only knew that the next morning when the temple bell rang, his familiar figure was once again on the porch, eyes gentle, as if he had never known fatigue. Because for some people, their strength does not lie in the body, but in the way they love others, even at their most painful moments. And that is something no illness can take away. On a distant hillside where the wind often loses its way because it's so quiet, an ancient temple lay hidden among dark green pines. It had stood for more than 100 years, its tiled roof thick with moss, like an old blanket laid down by time. The stone walls were rough, and the cobblestone steps up to the three-gate entrance were uneven, like the spine of an old dragon. Each footstep into the courtyard slowed of its own accord, as if wind and time here both moved gently, softly, careful not to disturb the solemn stillness spread over everything. Hanging in the center of the temple yard was a silent bronze bell. It was nearly as big as a small child, its body engraved with lotus flowers worn faint, its rim stained with green patina, the trace of many seasons of sun and rain. The bell hung from a glossy black ironwood frame, the grain polished as if it had drunk down hundreds of winters. And strangely, this bell did not ring each day like the other temple bells. It did not announce the morning practice, mark the afternoon watch, or remind pilgrims of the service hour. It rang only when someone had just left this life. Anyone who had heard it could never forget its sound. It was not a bright, long chime like the festival bells at early spring, not hurried like the school bell from childhood. Its sound was low, deep, dense, rolling through the mountains and forest like the heavy breathing of the earth itself. When it rang, the very air seemed to change color. The first note sliced cleanly through the leftover noise in everyone's mind. Then the echo spread out, touching every stone wall, every old pine trunk, every dry leaf, and everything fell silent as if bowing its head. Each time that bell rang, the entire monastery thickened with a different kind of silence. Novices sweeping leaves in the yard would stop their bamboo brooms frozen on the tiles. The monks chanting in the main hall would pause, the wooden fisheyes lowered lips pressed together, as if holding an unfinished prayer in their hearts. Even the sparrows chattering on the roof tiles would suddenly fall quiet, still as stone. Even the wind along the corridor seemed to halt for a beat when it met the bell's sound, because everyone understood someone had just gone forever. That afternoon, the sky was on the verge of rain. The heavens were ashen like cinders, layers of gray cloud piled heavy over the hilltop. When the funeral bell sounded, it was as if the mountain's root trembled, the notes stretching out like a crack in time. All activity in the temple ceased. No words, not even a strong breath. Only the bell remained resounding like the earth sighing. When the last echo faded into the pines, the courtyard sank into stillness again. Only a small novice sat motionless by the porch, his dark eyes still bright with fear. A bamboo broom had fallen by his feet, straw smeared with wet soil. His cheeks flushed from the cold wind, but his lips had gone pale. Perhaps it was the first time he had heard the bell so near, so clear, as if it hadn't rung from the courtyard, but from inside his own chest. After a long while, he spoke, his voice thin as breath. "Why? Is the bell struck only when someone dies?" No one answered. He turned and saw his master sitting by the old Bodhi tree at the porch. The master's dark robe was quiet, as the earth's shadow, his eyes half closed, as though still listening to the bell's echo drift through the leaves. The boy hesitated, then mustered his courage and went on, voice more unsteady. "Why not ring the bell every day to remind us that everyone will go?" The question fell lightly like a petal, yet made the ground tremble in the heart. The master opened his eyes, his gaze returning slowly as if from very far away. It was neither cold nor sad, only deep, like a moonlit reflection in an old well. He didn't answer at once. The wind passed, his robe stirred, his long sleeve hung over his knee like an old willow branch. He looked toward the great bell, hanging motionless in the yard, the lengthening shadows gathering around it like a vast mourning cloak. After a long moment, the master spoke, his voice low, as a worn wooden fish, each word slipping through the folds of time. "Because the bell doesn't need to be struck every day. Death is already there, beside each person, every minute." The novice stared, lips parting, as if to ask something more, but no sound came. The evening breeze brushed his ear with cold, pulling him back to the present. The master looked at him stern, but not heavy, and continued, his voice still as deep as the bell's. "We don't hear the bell every day, but each day is one step closer to the time that bell will ring for ourselves." The words were light as smoke, yet fell into the boy's heart like a heavy stone. For a moment, he seemed to hear the funeral bell once more, not from the yard, but from within his chest. It wasn't loud, but it made him tremble, and strangely, it also made his heart grow calm. For the first time, he understood why, whenever the funeral bell rang, the whole temple stopped everything. Not only out of sorrow for the one who had just departed, but because everyone was bowing to the truth that they too would be the same. Then he stood and bowed very low toward the old bronze bell standing motionless in the yard. It did not ring, but in his eyes it had rung once again, only this time no one needed to strike it. The longer one lives, the more chillingly true this feels. In modern life, people can schedule everything: work meetings, vacations, future projects, but no one can know when the final bell will ring for themselves. People often think death waits at the end of the road, a far-off destination. But in truth, death is not at the end of the road. It walks beside each of us every day. It does not wait for gray hair or serious illness to draw near. It's present in every fragile breath, every step onto a bus, every brief ache in the left chest, every time someone never returns after what seemed like an ordinary hug. We're just too busy to notice. In today's world, we pour our energy into planning for the future. A future we assume will surely arrive, as if we had full control over being alive when that day comes. Young people bury themselves in work, build assets, chase status, and promise that later they'll slow down. Later, they'll love more. Later, they'll care for their health. Later, they'll spend time with aging parents. But have we ever asked, what if that bell rings for us tomorrow? Some people leave for work in the morning and never return in the afternoon. Some go to bed at night and never wake again. One urgent call in the night can change a family's world forever. No one knows which hug will be the last. No one knows which meal will be the last. No one knows which see you tomorrow will never come true. That's why it's dangerous to live as if death waits only at the end of the road. There was a time someone attended the funeral of an elderly layman who had been very active. He had reputation, wealth, status. Just months earlier when they met, he was eager about new investment trips he would take, goals he would complete. Then a stroke extinguished all plans. In a cold room filled with white flowers, all that remained was a still body and the sobbing of loved ones. No more goals, no more schedules, no more later. Witnessing that moment, the person suddenly understood the master's old teaching. If you live as if you'll never die, you will live shallowly. Only when you remember you will die do you begin to live truly. So the bell of morning is not meant to instill fear, but to awaken. If today were the last day, how would we live? Would we still waste time in pointless arguments? Would we still cling to old grudges? Would we still delay words of love, hugs, and simple thank yous? Or would we pause, take a deep breath, and live each moment as a gift being offered for the last time? Someone once asked a Zen master, "But if we keep remembering death, won't we live in fear?" The master smiled. No. Remembering death doesn't make people afraid. It makes them appreciative. Those who know they are finite don't waste time on one-upmanship. They don't have to win every debate. Don't torment themselves over someone's gossip. Don't cling to endless races to prove themselves. Because in the face of death, such things shrink to something almost ridiculous. No one on their deathbed thinks about how many people they beat. They think, did I love enough? Did I live true to my heart? Did I smile often enough? Letting go of the need to win is a way to live more truly before the final bell rings. There was once a middle-aged man, hot-tempered and competitive. After witnessing a friend's sudden death, he changed completely. He said, "I realized I had been living as if I were immortal, always thinking there would be more time to love, more time to apologize, more time to live honestly. But there's no more time that's guaranteed." From then on, he lived differently. He no longer chased status, no longer insisted on being right in every quarrel. He spent more time with family, did small but meaningful things, and began each day as if it were the last he'd be given. His eyes were light and unusually peaceful, like someone who had set down a very heavy burden. So if one day you hear a funeral bell somewhere, pause for a few seconds. Don't turn away. Let the sound quietly sink into your heart, because it doesn't only send off the departed, it reminds the living that time is passing and no one knows how many steps remain before that bell calls their own name. The funeral bell in that ancient temple still hangs silently during ordinary days, but not because death has vanished, only because it doesn't need to ring every day. Death already walks with us quietly with every breath. And only when we understand this do we stop panicking, start valuing each day, and dare to live truly without pretending, without postponing, without wasting time on what doesn't matter. Because no one knows which day will be the day the bell rings for themselves. And when that day comes, the only thing that can ease the heart is knowing we have lived every day as if it were the last. On a mountainside so quiet, it seemed to hold its breath, an old cemetery lay covered under thick moss and the scent of spent incense. The leaning headstones were like old backs resting against one another to get through the windy season. By day, the place was so still, you could hear the wind slip through the leaves thin and drawn out like someone's late-night breathing. You could even hear the gecko's feet glide across the stone wall, rustling like a needle-piercing cloth. By night, the moon fell onto each grave like drops of cold milk, so white it revealed the fine grains in the stone, and in a few hidden corners, the moonlight touched stark white bones sleeping through generations, only the curved rings of ribs left and dark hollows where eyes had once looked upon the world. At the edge of the cemetery, a small, solemn temple tucked itself behind a clump of bamboo. Its roof tiles were dark moss blotches, spreading like the scales of some ancient fish. When wind struck the chime hanging at the eaves, the sound wasn't loud, but round like a pebble, rolling a full circle around a millstone, and then lying still. The stone path to the temple was uneven. The darker spots were where people often stepped, the lighter places where time passed, but no one lingered. Each late afternoon, when dusk poured over the hill like a thin veil of smoke, a monk would appear among the headstones. He walked slowly, his brown robe brushing dry grass, left hand holding an oil-polished wooden mela, right hand hanging by his side, index finger slightly bent as if he had just picked something up and then let it go. He came to sit on a patch of level ground where a human skeleton had been carefully arranged, the skull set facing west, the arm bones laid in parallel, the leg bones stacked with care. Not everyone had the courage to let their eyes rest there long. Some passing by would steal a glance and immediately turn away as if their gaze had just grazed the edge of a cliff. But the monk was different. He sat back straight like a bamboo trunk that doesn't know how to bow, both knees on the ground, hands resting on his knees, palms open slightly like a windless lake. His eyes were half closed, not shut, not fully open, just enough for the last light of day to lay a slender streak across his pupils. Each time the wind passed his robe, him trembled very lightly, while his body stayed still as an exposed boulder in a flood-swollen river. If you stood close, you could hear the beads of his mala stir, softly clicking like raindrops on a thatch roof. Before him lay the skeleton. It did not threaten. It simply was white to the point of chill, honest to the point of cruelty. The eye sockets were two empty rings like windows that had lost their panes. The jawline had a jagged strip like a dry, stiff, drawn-out smile, a smile that spoke not of joy or sorrow, but of truth. The ribs curved like the slats of a fan half opened, stopping exactly where they had opened to like a story cut off mid-sentence. Who knows when alive that person may have walked through crowded markets, held small dreams, loved, raged, regretted. Now every name had fallen away from the frame. Only the quietest part of a life remained. He looked closely, neither avoiding nor judging. A very slight smile appeared at the corner of his lips, not a smile of knowing better, still less. A defiant smile, but the smile of someone recognizing an old friend, impermanence. That smile made his face look suddenly younger, as if it had long been keeping a place open for it. Curious people sometimes hid in the bamboo to spy, hoping to catch something uncanny. A gust blowing the skull away, a dark shadow rising from the bones, or at least a flicker of fear crossing the monk's face. But no, there was only silence, hard as stone and soft as water. The sun dropped another notch. Across the sky, crows flew their wings, rasping like ripping paper. Somewhere a pine cone fell and struck the ground with a thud, and amid those scraps of sound his breathing was even and deep, as if learned from the earth itself. Why sit here among bones for years on end? Villagers asked one another, then tired of asking. The question fell like dry leaves no one bothered to pick up. Only an orphan boy living on the slope brought a water jug to the temple for a ladle each evening. Once he plucked up the nerve set, the jug down, and stood a few steps from the monk. He looked at the skeleton, afraid, but curiously afraid. Finally he stammered, "Master, aren't you afraid?" The monk opened his eyes and turned his gaze, not piercing anyone, but merely touching and resting like a light hand. Afraid of what he asked. That. "I am not afraid," he said slowly, "because that is me, just in another way." The boy was puzzled, eyes darting between the monk and the skeleton, trying to find a resemblance. The monk pointed to his own chest. "Here something is breathing. There that has gone. But where the two sides meet is the truth." The boy didn't fully understand. But that voice, that cadence, and that smile made his fear step back. He sat down at the edge of the grass and listened to the wind thread through the skeleton's hollows, making a strange sound, not a hiss, not quite a flute, an airy nothing, just audible if one was willing to listen. A few days later, the rains came. Mountain rain fell dense and straight, drumming on stone. The cemetery sank into a blurry sheet of water. Chrysanthemums on the graves bowed their heads. The earth gave off a dark scent. People thought surely he wouldn't come. But by evening, the brown robe appeared in the rain, like a mushroom sprouting in its familiar place. He draped a simple cloak and sat in the exact spot. Rainwater flowed over the bones, pooled in the eye sockets, and fell drop by drop, like someone weeping on behalf of the one lying still. When the rain stopped, the sky left a thin band of light behind the mountain. The bones were a little cleaner, whiter. Fine cracks showed like the map of a strange land. Years passed. People came and went. Once another skeleton was moved and placed near where he sat. He also cleaned it and laid it straight, the two skulls facing the same direction. Someone joked, "Master has a friend now." He didn't answer, only added another slight smile. Moons waxed and waned. Winds shifted, leaves fell, then were gathered away. The monk remained like a landmark, so time would know which way to flow. One dusk, some bold youngsters dared each other to cross the cemetery at twilight. They laughed loudly, snapped a few dry branches, acting unafraid. But as they neared, seeing his posture and the two skeletons before him, their laughter dimmed, as if they had stepped into someone's house while people were whispering. One asked, "Master, why do you sit here?" "What for?" "To look," he said. "Look at what?" "At what people usually avoid." The man was about to toss off a joke, but when he met the monk's gaze, a gaze without judgment, yet giving no permission to lie to oneself, he shut his mouth. They left, no longer laughing. At the gate, one turned back and caught the very slight smile on the monk's lips, a smile with no hint of mockery. That night at home, for the first time, he set his phone down earlier than usual and sat looking at his aging parents a little longer. On some evenings, the wind carried the scent of pine needles and cooled incense ash, pushing village sounds uphill, children calling to one another, the thud of pestles, dogs barking at passing shadows. All of it drifted to the small temple, circled once and faded. In the thin ribbon of incense smoke, the monk still sat, and the smile stayed exactly where it belonged, like a small nail holding a piece of cloth steady, while the rest is sewn. If anyone had the patience to sit a short way from him, quiet as he was, they would notice something strange. That smile didn't seem meant only for the skeleton. It was for the fallen leaf, the stone that stubbed a toe, the ant hurrying off with a grain of rice, and for the very body sitting there, a body that one day would also come apart into parts, just like the skeleton in front of it. The smile was like a small nod to everything. I see you. I accept you. I won't run. Perhaps that's why people said the smile made the cemetery a little warmer. When the night fog settled, the stones were still cold, but no longer chilling. The moon was still white, but less sharp. The wind still blew, but sounded as if through a thin cloth dried in the sun. No miracle was on display. Only the steady presence of someone willing to sit before what no one wants to sit before. Over time, that presence became a small but enduring fire, enough for anyone passing by to see and slow their step half a beat. Late one summer, the orphan boy, now grown, returned. He laid a bunch of yellow chrysanthemums on a grave, then took a small mirror from his pocket and quickly checked his face. Seeing new traces of sun, wind, and weariness, he suddenly laughed, a very slight laugh like the one he'd seen on the monk's lips. He sat down, not far from the monk, and looked where the monk looked. In that moment, he understood a little more of what he hadn't before. Between the one who is breathing and the skeleton before him, there is a thread tied by truth. And when the panicked part of us agrees to sit still, truth becomes a friend. That evening's twilight was soft as incense ash. The last light rested on the crown of the skull, gently bright. The monk sat back, straight eyes half closed. On his lips, a very slight smile, so slight you'd miss it if you didn't look carefully. But anyone who had seen it would remember it always. For it was a smile that could sit with a skeleton, without trembling, be with a human life, without clinging, be with oneself, without lying. And there in the old cemetery on the mountainside, that smile taught more than a few people how to look at the bony hand of time and still keep peace in their chest. Someone once heard about this monk while studying the way. At first, they couldn't understand. Why choose to meditate beside a skeleton? Why not choose a garden full of flowers or a babbling waterfall or a sun-washed mountaintop? The storyteller only smiled and said, because he wants to look straight at the truth people always avoid. And that truth is every body will become a skeleton. No exceptions. No one escapes. Whether king or beggar, wealthy or ordinary, healthy or young, all will return to that stark white form. Sitting before the skeleton, the monk did not try to drive away thoughts of death. He invited them, looked straight at them, and smiled. In modern society, people often live as if immortal. They hide their age, fear every wrinkle, spend their lives extending lifespan, doing whatever they can to postpone the final end. Some even shudder and turn away at the mere word death. But it is precisely that avoidance that makes them more afraid. What is buried in darkness will haunt us. Conversely, when we dare to bring it into the light and look straight at it, what once frightened us becomes ordinary. Contemplating impermanence so as not to fear death, that is why the monk sat beside the skeleton and smiled. Not because he wanted to die, but because he understood death is part of life, not life's enemy. And when that is understood, death loses its power to make us panic. Once someone asked the monk, "Do you ever feel sad when you look at that skeleton?" He smiled and shook his head. "I don't see death in it. I see the truth. The truth that all of us are walking the same direction. The truth that each breath is a fragile gift with no guarantee of the next. And precisely because of that, each breath is precious." Someone once sat a long time in a hospice where those with little time left are cared for. Bodies lay there, thin, fragile, panting each breath. No more makeup, no titles, no status, nothing left but a body about to come apart. Then the image of the monk sitting beside the skeleton surfaced. All of us eventually arrive there. So it is meaningless to cling too tightly to this body, the very thing time will surely reclaim. Just as it is meaningless to cling to fame, something that will fall like autumn leaves and cannot be carried when the body dissolves. Cling less to the body, cling less to renown, because nothing accompanies a person to the end. Many in modern life spend their whole lives climbing a ladder of status. But at the top, they find only cold wind. No one left to hold, nowhere left to return, and at their feet, a spent body and an empty heart, because they forgot one thing: the final destination is not to be higher than others, but deeper within oneself. To go deeper, you must dare to look at life's limits. Know that time is finite, the body is finite, opportunities are finite. And precisely because they are finite, we live more, truly choose more carefully, love more. When we know life's limits, we stop wasting time on what doesn't matter. Stop draining the mind in endless competitions. Stop postponing important things as if there were countless tomorrows. Because who knows? How many tomorrows are left? Someone once asked me, how can I live more deeply? I thought of the monk beside the skeleton and answered, live as if each day were a send-off for yourself. Because when you live that way, every hug is warmer, every thank you more sincere, every ordinary afternoon becomes a cherished memory. You no longer rush to accumulate, to prove, to surpass someone. You live to be present fully and deeply. Once a young disciple asked the monk, if I contemplate impermanence all the time, won't I become pessimistic? He smiled, eyes gentle as morning mist. No. Contemplating impermanence doesn't make you pessimistic. it wakes you up. When you know things will be lost, you treasure them while they are here. When you know people will leave, you dare to love them more deeply. When you know you yourself will become that skeleton, you stop living shallowly. Many fear death so much they don't dare think of it. But death doesn't vanish because we're afraid. It still walks beside each person day by day, hour by hour, breath by breath. So instead of fearing it, learn to look it in the eye and smile like the monk beside the skeleton. When you can smile at death, you finally know how to live. Living is no longer a flight. It becomes an enjoyment of each moment, each glance, each brush of wind on the skin, each drop of water in the hand. And then, when the final moment comes, you will leave like that monk, calm, smiling without regret. The skeleton still lay there, stark white in the evening sun. The monk still sat beside it, eyes half-closed, lips holding a breeze-light smile. There was no tragedy here. Only truth bare simple and profoundly freeing. For when we know for certain that every body will become a skeleton, we stop clinging to the illusion of immortality. And when we stop that illusion, we begin to live like human beings, able to love, to pause, to breathe deeply, to cherish each day. That morning, the temple courtyard looked as if it had been dusted with a thin veil of pink silk. In the night, the peach garden had silently burst into bloom. By dawn, each rosy petal began to leave its branch spinning like little paper boats set afloat on the wind. They landed on the mossy steps, lay on the dark roof tiles, and settled on the brown robes of novices bent over sweeping the yard. The peach scent drifted faintly, so light you feared a hurried breath might scatter it. By the old peach tree, a young novice stood perfectly still. A fleeting sadness passed over his fresh face like a thin cloud drawn across sunlight. He watched petals still bright with color fall from the branch, pained like someone seeing off a small life that had barely greeted the world before dissolving into air. The scratchy whisper of bamboo brooms thinned as if they too knew to fall silent before this falling. The master approached his brown robe, casting a long shadow across the bricks. He didn't speak at once. He simply stood beside the boy, listening to the wind threading through the leaves and the petals touching the ground as softly as a fingertip. Then he bent down, picked up a petal still holding a bead of dew, and set it lightly in the small open palm. His voice was soft as breath. No flower blooms forever, but the earth remembers its fragrance. The novice looked up. Morning light washed his eyes until they shone. The petal lay still in his hand, its fine veins visible in the first sunlight, like lines written in invisible ink. The master watched the falling petals, smiling gently, like the last speck of spring sunlight slipping through leaves. A petal's life is brief, but it doesn't disappear. It dissolves into the soil, feeds the tree, so next season there will be new blossoms. And its fragrance remains in this earth, in the wind, in the eyes of those who once beheld it. A breeze passed, carrying a few pink slivers spinning like tiny cradles. Instinctively, the boy cupped his hand over the petal he held, then let it go, afraid that holding too tightly would crush it. In the distance, the wooden fish for morning practice mingled with birds calling their flock, weaving into a slow rhythm. The last drops of dew on the bodhi leaves fell onto the steps, breaking into glittering points. "If you listen," the master said softly, "you'll hear the earth remembering." The boy drew a deep breath. Beneath the delicate peach scent was the mild dampness of soil, the smell of roots, the night wind just receding. He felt he could almost hear the whisper of the new mud at the base, where roots were drinking the petal as it melted away. Without quite knowing why his sadness lowered a notch, not gone but deeper and warmer. Another petal fell and landed right in his palm beside the first. The two touched lightly like two small boats mooring together. He looked closely between those fine veins. Another spring was being written slowly in ink only the earth could read. He glanced up into the peach tree. A few late buds still waiting to open, a few other petals ready to go. The whole tree felt like a gentle clock telling time by its scent. "Master," he asked softly, "if the fragrance remembers, do people remember too?" The master smiled, letting his gaze travel once around the courtyard, pausing at the sweeping novices, the dark tiles, the mossy steps, the little patch of sky between two branches. People remember too. But people's memories are noisy. The earth's memory is quiet. Which one you hear depends on whether your heart is settled or stirred. The wind shifted. A string of wind chimes rang at the eaves, clear, then fading. On the roof, a few pink slivers slid like snow shy of the sun. The boy lowered his eyes and set the two petals on the edge of the flower bed, pressing them gently with a fingertip so they could touch the warmth below. He did it as if sending a letter with no name on the envelope, yet certain it would reach the right place. "Do you see?" the master said gently. "Falling isn't the end. Falling is a way of returning." The boy nodded. In that moment, he felt everything linked by invisible threads, the bamboo broom's rasp to the leaf's veins, the earth's smell to the wind's a streak of sunlight, to a drop of dew, a falling petal, to a bud not yet sprouted. Everything was shifting very slightly unnoticed, as if arranged by a patient hand. Across the yard, the novices began sweeping again. The broom bristles murmured over the steps. One boy sneezed from the pollen and laughed. The laughter rose, then faded, leaving a calm space like a still lake. Outside the gate, the steps of far-off pilgrims drifted near the three-arched gate, paused, then turned down another path. In the main hall, an oil lamp flickered, casting the shadow of an old statue on the wall like a cloud holding still. The novice sat down, with his back to the peach tree eyes, following the last petals of the morning's fall. Each took its own path, some spinning 3 times before landing, some dropping, straight like a needle. But wherever they came down, they shared the same destination, the earth. The master stood beside him, hands hidden in his sleeves, listening to the same sound. The boy did the sound of homecoming. "Tomorrow," the master said, "we'll gather the dried petals and scatter them around the base. Next season, this spot will be more fragrant." "Yes," the boy answered, his voice light as placing a small pebble in a palm. The sun climbed another notch, and the pink on the courtyard slowly faded, giving way to clear light. A few petals wedged between roof tiles puffed lightly, as if about to retell last night's story, in a language only rain could understand. The boy smiled without meaning to, thin as a thread stitching the torn edge of his sadness. Before leaving the peach tree, he bent down and pressed his hand to the soil for a moment, as if greeting someone below. The master watched, nodded, and strolled toward the porch, where the tea had just finished steeping. Overhead, a late petal fell so slowly it seemed unwilling to touch the ground, but in the end it did, soft as an exhale. By then, the courtyard was no longer merely covered in flowers. It was covered in quiet promises between earth and fragrance. And between two hands, one old one, young something small, had just been given without a name and without binding, yet destined to linger long on the wind, that no flower blooms forever. But fragrance knows the way home. The longer one lives, the clearer it becomes. Life is finite, but love endures. Modern society often makes people fear life's brevity. We race to extend longevity, try to delay aging, grasp at everything so it won't vanish. But what makes a life memorable has never been its length. A blossom may open for a single day and be remembered forever. A person may live briefly, yet the love they leave can pass through generations. No one remembers how long a rain lasted, only the drop that saved a parched field. No one remembers precisely how old someone lived to be. They remember gentle eyes, a hand that held theirs when they were in despair. The body will fall like petals, but love does not evaporate. I once visited an orphanage on the outskirts of town. Amid the noisy children, an old black and white photo hung on the wall, the picture of a woman who had died years ago. Staff told me she founded the orphanage, raised hundreds of children, then passed quietly while still not old. No one remembered her voice or how she walked. But each child who grew up there, now adults, often returned to light incense beneath the photo, eyes brimming as they whispered, "Mother." She had fallen from the branch of life like a petal, but her fragrance remained in every child who learned to smile after months of tears, in every heart that learned to love despite being abandoned. And I understood a life need not be long only fragrant. Modern culture often teaches that a life's worth lies in lasting, long-standing, out much being widely known. But true worth doesn't lie in permanence. It lies in what we leave behind. You don't need 100 years to make a difference. One day, lived fully, wholeheartedly, can sow an indelible mark. Like that petal, it doesn't need to last. It only needs to open with all it has, release all its fragrance, and it has fulfilled its role in this universe. People are the same. We don't need monuments. We don't need our names in history books. We only need to live each day with kindness, so everyone who crosses our path feels a little lighter, a little warmer. That is enough. So don't fear life's finiteness. Good deeds do not vanish when we are gone. They dissolve into others like petals into earth. They live in memory and gratitude in the quiet changes of hearts that were once touched. Perhaps no one will remember our names, but they will remember the warmth they felt when we were near, and that is worth more than any permanence. Modern society often obsesses over being remembered forever, but all things permanent eventually pass. Stone statues wear down, buildings fall, renowned names fade in books. The only thing that doesn't disappear is the effect of small good deeds once sown. A word of encouragement at the right time can save a life. A kind act can become the brightest memory in a dark childhood, and such things will be passed on and on, like a flower's fragrance lingering in the wind long after the petals have fallen. Someone once asked a Zen master, "How can I know if my life has meaning?" The master remembered the story of the petal and replied, "Don't ask whether you'll be remembered forever. Ask whether you've given off fragrance today." because meaning isn't in how long we last, but in whether we live wholeheartedly each day. No need to leave a grand mark, leave warmth. No need to be everlasting, be sincere. A petal doesn't need to be preserved in a book. It only needs to bloom once with all it has, so the earth remembers its scent. People are the same. In the last days of spring, petals carpeted the temple courtyard. The novice was no longer sad as before. He swept and smiled as if speaking to the petals lying quietly on the ground. Your fragrance will return as a new spring. The master watched and nodded lightly, his gentle smile deep as the old peach tree's roots. For this is the truth everyone needs to remember. This body will fall like a petal, but if we have lived fully, kindly, lovingly, then the fragrance will remain in this world even when we are gone. Late in summer, the sky seemed to pour honey over the mountainside. The lake at the foot of the mountain rippled with golden light, reflecting clouds drifting slowly as if deep in thought. Near the shore, a single lotus leaf floated apart, its dark green surface still holding the traces of last night's rain. On it, a drop of water had just formed perfectly round, crystal clear, glinting like a tiny jewel. It trembled before the thin breeze so delicate, it seemed a stronger breath might topple it. The drop looked out to the distance, a vast river, rolling and churning its waves white under the sun. From that sight, a vague fear rose up fast like weeds. It knew that with just one strong gust, it would fall from the leaf, be swept into the rushing water, and disappear. No shape, no name, no longer a drop. The thought was like a fine blade nicking its fragile round rim and making its watery body shake without end. It tried to cling to the lotus leaf's rough surface like a child gripping the edge of a door. A man in a brown robe walking along the lakeshore stopped. His shadow stretched across the grass to the water's edge. He bent down, his gaze gentle like the lake where the wind can no longer reach. Seeing the drop shivering with worry, he smiled a smile so light it left no mark on the air. "You won't disappear," he said, his voice slow and warm like the earth's breath. "When you dissolve, you'll become the whole river." The drop went still, as if held by an invisible hand. In that moment, the sounds around the lake grew distinct, a dragonfly skimming the water, a fish's faint splash by the reeds, the wind brushing the lotus veins like a plucked string. Everything was the same as before, yet nearer, slower, as if seen through a new frame. "You won't be lost," the man in brown went on, eyes never leaving the drop. "You'll simply stop being a separate drop, to return to the whole." Return to the whole, those 4 words fell into the drop's heart like a pebble into a lake. The circles spread. The fear that had hovered at the edge slowly thinned like a layer of mist. It suddenly recognized the water in its body was the rain from last night. The rain was the river's vapor. The sky's clouds, the turning paths of water, of which it had only just taken a temporary shape called drop. A light breeze blew. The drop leaned, clung to the leaf's surface for one last beat, as if to say goodbye. Then it let go. It fell soft as an exhale finally allowed after a long time. The instant it touched the water, the name drop vanished. Yet nothing broke. It simply became the river's motion, the small ripples rolling toward the sandy bank, the stretching gleam under the sun, the beating rhythm of nameless small waves. The man in brown straightened and watched the circles fade without haste. He knew the drop was still there in every form the eye cannot name. Far off the river kept going, carrying the golden clouds. On the lake, the lotus leaf stayed green, and somewhere deeper than fear, a small being had just learned how to return. Someone had heard that story long ago, when he was a novice newly arrived at the temple. And the longer he lived, the more deeply he felt it. Death is not an ending, but a merging with the whole. Modern society often makes people fear death as if it were a bottomless pit. We grow up thinking life is a race to hold on to as much as possible: our bodies, our reputation, our wealth, our position. Then the thought of there will be no more me sends many into panic. But the truth is, no one truly disappears. We simply stop existing as a separate individual and return in a larger form. Like that drop seemingly gone, but in fact only changed in shape. It blends into the river, the sea. The sky returns as rain, continuing water's journey no longer confined to a tiny form. Once someone sat by the bed of an old patient near death. The man gripped a hand, his eyes cloudy like a veil of mist. "I'm afraid, because I don't know where I'll go." The visitor looked at him and said slowly, "You're not going anywhere. You're going home. This body will return to the earth. This breath will return to the wind. This warmth will return in sunlight in the arms of those you loved. Nothing disappears, it only changes form." And the old man's tears fell light as dew melting at dawn. So in truth, the individual matters less than continuity. We often live as if the individual were the center of the universe. We try to make our names last forever, to put our image everywhere, to make sure everyone knows who I am. But one day this body will dissolve, and that name will be only a few words on a stone fading under moss. What remains is not the I, but what we have blended into this life. Like the drop that falls into the river, it no longer has a name or a shape. Yet because of it, the river is a little fuller, a little cooler, a little more alive. People are the same. We don't need to become a great individual. We only need to add to this life each day a measure of gentleness, a measure of kindness, a measure of understanding. That is how we truly continue, even when the body is gone. There's something strange the more tightly we cling to the self, the lonelier and more afraid we become. The more we think I is what matters most, the more we fear when I is about to end. The more we try to assert the self, the more exhausted we are by the endless race to prove our worth. But when we dare to release the self, we become truly free. When we release the self, we are free like the drop when it falls into the river. It no longer has to keep its shape, no longer fears shattering, no longer stands alone. It becomes the river's movement, the thunder of the falls, the vastness of the sea, the gentleness of rain, the calm of clouds. And that is the deepest freedom a human life can touch. There was once a successful man who spent his life accumulating. He said, "I'm afraid of losing everything. I'm afraid no one will remember me." But in old age, he began tending a garden, teaching neighborhood children to read, sharing old books with the public library. And something strange happened. He no longer feared death, because he realized he had sown parts of himself into so many places that even when this body is gone, those parts will go on in others in this life. A drop no longer fears disappearing once it has joined the river. We are born from the union of countless elements from our parents, our ancestors, from earth, water, wind, fire, from sunlight, from spring rain, from every grain of rice and drop of water that raised this body. Nothing in us is ours alone, so when we dissolve, we are only returning to the sky and earth what we borrowed. Not lost at all, only changed in form like the drop returning to the river. Someone once asked a Zen master, "How can I not fear death?" The master remembered that drop and replied, "Don't think you're disappearing, think you're going home." Because if you are only an individual, death feels like an abyss. But if you are part of the whole, death is only a dissolving to continue in another form. Death does not take people from life. It brings them into life in a new way. The drop on the leaf finally fell. It dissolved its shape, gone. But in that very instant, it was no longer small, no longer lonely, no longer afraid. It became the river's murmur, the vastness of water, the gentleness of rain, the wideness of the sea. And the river kept flowing cool, endless, like life itself. So if one day you must let everything go, remember the Zen master's words by the lakeshore that year. When you dissolve, you will become the whole river. Don't fear losing yourself, because the little self is only the drop. The true us has always been the river, merely wearing the shape of a drop for a while. That night, the sky was like a sheet of black silk without a crease, stretched flat over the roof of the old temple. Above, the sparse stars were like pinpricks, and the wind slipped softly through the bamboo garden, carrying the scent of damp earth, and a faint trace of incense burned out after the evening service. The whole monastery sank into quiet sleep. Only the main hall was slightly ajar, exhaling a thin thread of light, just enough for the night to know there was still a bit of warmth there. In the main hall, before an ancient statue weathered by time, a lone candle was burning. The little flame trembled like a child's heart standing in a vast, dark square. Wax dripped in thick beads, pooling at the candle's base like tears that hadn't been wiped away. On the cold stone floor, old wax had turned white, ridged like fabric, telling of long nights gone by. The candle had burned for hours. From a full round body, only a short length remained, like someone exhausted after a long journey, still trying to stand straight, so the light wouldn't fall. The flame cast its shadow on the wall, shrinking and stretching, as if listening to the night. Outside, the night wind began to blow through the cracks in the wooden door, slipping in along time's fissures. The wind wasn't hurried or strong. It only brushed lightly, just enough to make the flame shiver. "I'm about to go out." The candle whispered so softly that unless you pressed your ear close, you'd think it was the sound of cracking wax. "I'm afraid." The wind replied, gentle as a hand stroking silk. "Don't be afraid. When you go out, your light will blend into the night sky." The candle froze. A bead of wax halted mid-fall, pulling a fine thread like a strand of spiderweb. The flame quivered and tilted to one side as if to ask, "But if I go out, I'll be no more. Who will remember who I was?" The wind slipped lightly behind the statue, threaded through a thin wind chime, and drew a small tone from it before it faded. The wind circled back to the front of the altar and cradled the flame as a kitten might brush around its mother's legs. "No, you won't disappear. The wind said each word falling like a drop of dew. You'll only change form. Your light will remain in the things you've illuminated, and in the darkness you've driven away. The candle leaned fully, laying a stroke of light across the carved wooden wall of dragons. There the line stood out clearly, the dragon scales a trail of clouds, the tip of the guardian's sword beside it. The candle flickered a little, as if remembering it had brought those patterns into relief, had let the pilgrim's eyes read the faint mantras on the stele, had lit the incense to flame, had carried the sutras a little farther on the thin ribbon of smoke. But when I go out, the candle said softly, this place will be dark. The wind smiled in the way only wind can by spiraling softly around the wick. Darkness then light, light then darkness. Tonight you go out, tomorrow another will burn. Light doesn't belong entirely to any one candle. Light is the river, and each of you is just a drop passing through. The candle fell silent. Deep within the flame, the wick clicked with a tiny titch, like a heart nodding. Outside, a high wind skimmed the bamboo tops, leaving a rustle like someone turning the page of a book. In the main hall, the statue's shadow rose halfway like a mountain. The candle suddenly remembered how many nights it had seen trembling old hands pressed together. Young eyes lifted up tears that didn't fall, but drew back inward and became silence. It remembered the very soft whisper of someone saying, "Please help my mother through this illness," and how when the flame leaned with the breeze, it tried to stand firm so that prayer wouldn't break. Will anyone remember I once burned here? The candle asked, not asking for a reward, but like a child, asking if its mother saw it wave. No one needs to remember your name, the wind answered. It's enough that someone read a sutra, found the path, saw their own face in the darkness. Then you remain. Light doesn't leave a signature. Light leaves a way. The candle suddenly smiled, a thin golden smile that made the flame flare up once. For a moment, the whole hall was brighter. The lotus painting on the wall became a lake. The Buddha's eyes grew kinder, and the fine dust on the altar glittered like a cluster of sand stars. Seeing this, the wind murmured, "You see, you're not just standing here. You're in that person's eyes when their eyes are lit. In the words, they're about to speak a little more kindly. In the steps, they'll set down a little more gently. You leave the candle's body, but you've borrowed countless other bodies to remain." The candle listened, and its heart felt suddenly light, like a fresh layer of wax smoothed by the wind. Yet a worry still fluttered like a thin streak of smoke. If one day there are no more candles, will darkness win? The wind laughed wider, this time enough to make two side curtains billow softly. Darkness doesn't win. Darkness is only the place light hasn't reached yet, and when light appears, darkness makes room. This isn't a battle, it's a dance. The word dance fell to the stone floor and sprang a spark of joy no eye could see. The candle imagined itself as a single step in that dance, small, but without it, the dance would miss a beat. It stopped asking, "When will I go out?" and asked instead, until the last moment, "Where else can I shine?" It tilted and touched light to an old photo frame set awry, letting that faded face brighten once more. It tipped a little glow onto the wall calendar where someone had circled a day in red ink. It shone onto the floor where the old wax stains lay, so it could see its nights stacked together into a timeline of wax. The wind quieted, as if yielding to the flame's final concentration. Far off, an owl called 3 short, crisp notes. By the porch, a gecko darted past, leaving a dry sound like a crushed dead leaf. Time drew tight, then loosened. The candle looked over the entire hall one more time, with a kind of eye only fire has, where shadows still lingered, where there was enough, where a last speck of light was needed. It shone there just a little, just enough, neither wasteful nor stingy. "I'm ready," it said clearer now, like a small flute that has found its range. "Good," the wind replied, as gentle as it had been all night. "When you're ready, going out is another way of lighting." The flame suddenly stood very straight one rare time. It no longer trembled. The wick clicked once more very softly, like a tiny answer. Then the flame drew in and in until it was a neat point, like a drop of honey. In the last instant, it touched the darkness lightly, like a hand to a child's brow wishing good sleep, and it went out. A thin wisp of smoke rose curled into a letter no one could read and dissolved. But the space didn't collapse as it does when the power fails. A faint warmth still clung to the wall. A lingering trace of light hovered at the edge of the eye. A straight line of calm ran from the altar to the door. Outside, the night wasn't harsher, but deeper. Among the stars, one point suddenly stood out as if awakened. The wind stood still for a few beats, as if keeping vigil for a friend who had just left its old form. Then it moved gently, gathering the remnants of light and sharing them with the dimmest corners of the temple beneath the altar, where someone had left a pair of sandals. Up on the roof tiles where a sparrow tucked its head beneath its wing. Across the steps where tomorrow bare feet would tread for morning practice. The wind went on as if staying, went on as if leaving a swath of light draped across the night's back. At the threshold, a novice woke from a dream of lightning and peeked in. In the main hall, darker than usual, he thought he would be afraid. Strangely, he felt only a full, gentle quiet, as if someone had finished tidying a room and was simply waiting with the door open for dawn to come in. On the candle stand, wax had set into a frozen flower, its petals thin as paper. He smiled the smile of someone who has just understood a small thing. Outside the eaves, the wind continued down the corridor, across the courtyard, and into the bamboo garden. There it met tremulous newborn dewdrops. The wind told them, "Don't be afraid. When you fall, you will be wet grass the morning scent," the sound of children calling each other at the gate. The wind found an oil lamp in the kitchen that hadn't quite gone out, and blew very softly to let it rest. The wind met the sky and lifted the edge of a cloud a little, so a few more stars could show. In the main hall, the candle stand stood still like a sentry who had finished a shift. The ancient statue remained kindly. On the wall, the darkness wasn't thicker. It simply lay down, leaning back, waiting for morning. Somewhere far away, perhaps in the heart of someone who had prayed earlier that evening, a small light the candle had entrusted was being kept warm, ready to walk with them through a day, perhaps through a lifetime. The night went on, like a long arm wrapping around the temple courtyard. It was not yet dawn, but the night had thinned. The wind returned once more, bent close to where the candle had just gone out, and whispered as if to someone sleeping, "See, you're not gone. You're simply everywhere more than before." Then the wind went, and the night, as if understanding, kept everything still, so that at dawn, when the practice bell rang, people would think the new day had awakened the temple. In truth, that was only the moment the temple realized the light had never left. It only changed form. It only changed places. And every candle, however small, however shaky, once it dares to burn itself completely, becomes part of the night sky. Someone once heard this story from an old master at the temple when they were very young. Back then, they didn't understand. It only felt sad because it seemed the candle had to face an unavoidable end to be snuffed out. But the older they grew through seasons of funerals and farewells, the more they understood why the master told it with a gentle smile. Because life doesn't disappear, it only changes form. People often think death means vanishing, but what we call self was never a fixed thing. Moment by moment, it keeps changing. Form, old cells die, new cells are born. Breath goes in and out. Thoughts come and go. There is no fixed me from beginning to end. Therefore, when the body dissolves, that isn't an ending. It's only another change of form, like the candle's light blending into the night. Someone once stood by the bed of a person near death. An old woman rasped her voice dry as dead leaves. Then, will I disappear? The visitor looked at her and gently shook their head. No, you won't disappear. You just won't be in this one form anymore. The warmth of your hands once warmed your grandchildren's hands. Your words once comforted fragile hearts. Those things remain even if this body does not. Those who leave are not lost. They only shift into a form the naked eye can no longer see. Modern life makes people obsessed with outward form. We think value lies in looks, youth, strength, position. We cling to every crease of skin, every photo, every emblem, as if they define who we are. But all those things are only the candle's wax. They will melt, they will vanish. Don't cling to outer form. It isn't who we are. What truly is us is the light. And that light isn't in appearance, but in what we have illuminated in others' lives. No one remembers how tall a candle was or what color its body had. They remember that a room was once bright because of it. People are the same. No one remembers how beautiful we were, how rich, how powerful. They remember how they were comforted, supported, and touched when they were with us. There was once an ordinary school teacher in a small town. He lived simply with no fame and no great wealth. But at his funeral, the hall was packed with former students, many traveling from far away. They embraced and wept, telling stories of how he lifted them during the darkest years of childhood. He left no form, no monument, no medals, no material legacy. But he left light in each person whose faith he rekindled, witnessing that everyone understood a life's true worth isn't in form, but in the light it leaves. Therefore, the important thing isn't how not to go out, but what we light while we still shine. No one can shine forever. The body ages, strength runs out, breath stops. But if while we burn, we have shown someone the way, eased some darkness around them, then that light will continue even when we're gone. Like that candle, when it went out, the light it had once given still remained in the memory of the darkness. The flame was gone, but the darkness was no longer the same. Modern society often urges us to leave a great legacy, a name on billboards, titles, assets, achievements. But light doesn't need to be grand, it needs to be true. A tiny beam is enough to make the night less absolute. A gentle word can change an entire life. A kind act can reignite hope in someone in despair. And that is true value, something that cannot be measured, worn down, or lost with time. Someone once asked a Zen master, "How can I not fear being forgotten?" The master remembered the story of the candle in the wind and answered, "Don't strive to be remembered. Strive to make each minute of your life a light, because once you have lit the way, even when you're gone, that light continues in the hearts once illuminated." No need for anyone to speak your name, no need for a memorial photo, no need for a grand legacy. It's enough that each second you lived was a sincere spark. A candle doesn't need to exist forever. It only needs to burn rightly. That night, the candle finally went out. No more flame, no more wax, no more form. Yet the room stayed warm, as if light still clung to every brick. And outside, the wind kept blowing across the star-filled sky softly, as if carrying that small light into the infinite. The candle was no longer visible, but its light had become part of the night. And that is how a human life can depart, not leaving a form, only leaving light. That afternoon, the sky wore a pale yellow veil, like a gauze scarf laid lightly over the mountain crest. The wind moved quietly through the temple courtyard, brushing the Bodhi branches and letting a few dry leaves fall onto the worn stone steps. The sound of leaves touching the ground was as thin as a sigh. At the end of the corridor, a small room had its window slightly open. A slant of late sunlight crossed the wooden frame, slid up the lime-washed wall, and rested on the edge of a neatly folded blanket like a hyphen between day and night. The old master lay on a bamboo bed. The old bed's slats showed white fibers like human hair. A thin blanket was folded squarely at the foot, and at the head lay a frayed cotton pillow. The scent of jasmine tea from a cooled pot mingled with the smell of aged wood herbal medicine and sunlight. On a small table, a sandalwood mala lay still, one bead rolled to the edge as if it had just stopped after a long count. The window was ajar to let the breeze pass through, carrying the soft ringing of the wind chime at the eaves, like someone tapping a fingertip on a cup rim. The disciples stood around, no one speaking. Eyes-rimmed red hands gripping their robes now and then, taking a shallow breath and holding it, afraid to break the fragile quiet hanging across the room like a thin thread. One bit a lip pale. Another pressed a hand to their chest as if to steady an invisible weight rising up. Time in the room seemed to stretch slow enough to hear the fall of a speck of dust through the sunlight. The old master opened his eyes. His gaze made a round of the familiar faces that had followed him through so many seasons of rain and sun, so many ceremonies, so many retreats. At the corners of his eyes, the wrinkles lay like plowed fields, deep but gentle. His breath was short but still warm. He lifted his thin hand slightly, no higher than needed for the disciples to know he was calling each one closer, not with footsteps, but with presence. His voice rose as faint as wind moving over leaves, yet each word fell clear like a pebble set in a palm. I'm not going anywhere. I'm only changing form so you will no longer depend on me. A silence opened between his words and the strip of sunlight. Many eyes brimmed at once. A young novice took half a step forward and stopped, as if afraid to disturb the path of the breath just spoken. Outside, the wind touched the Bodhi row, and the leaves answered with a soft rustling like whispers. The wind chime rang lightly, adding a round note. The old master smiled. The small smile was like a needle stitching a tear in the air. For a moment, his face brightened, like someone who has just set down a burden carried too long. The light wasn't harsh. It only made the strip of sunlight on the blanket seem half a shade more golden. He glanced at the prayer beads, looked out the window, then back at the faces trembling to hold their tears. The look was so calm, it pushed others' panic back like waves meeting warm sand. No one cried out loud. There were only the thudding of hearts in chests and the rustle of brown robes brushing each other. An older disciple cupped a hand over the mouth and bowed very low, shoulders quivering slightly. A younger one clenched the edge of a sleeve, lips pressed tight, eyes wide, as if to engrave the image deep into the pupils for nightfall to see again. The wind in the courtyard shifted. A Bodhi leaf, ready to fall, floated through the window frame and landed on the bed's edge. Its heart shape lay by his wrist, green, turning to yellow veins thin as handwriting. No one dared pick it up. The leaf lay there like a message arriving right on time. Falling isn't the end. Falling is a return. The old master tilted his head slightly as if he had seen it. The smile at his mouth deepened by a thread. He closed his eyes. The motion was as light as someone merely dozing for a moment. His lids met, casting a fine shadow over his cheek. The room did not change color. The sunstripe stayed resting on the blanket's edge. His breath drew in once very deep, and then released long and smooth like a thread being let go. After that, only the Bodhi wind passing the window remained steady, slow, like someone reciting an old gatha. In that instant, no one knew what to do with their hands. Hands hovered in the air, then slowly lowered and folded before their chests. One person bowed forehead, touching the backs of their hands. Another pulled the blanket a little higher, the motion so slow it was almost invisible. The whole room settled into a shared rhythm, recognizing a space just opened. Not noisy, not violent, but clear as an empty chair at a family table. Outside the eaves, the afternoon light dropped another notch, dyeing the steps a deep gold. The wind chime rang longer, as if the wind suddenly remembered it had to travel farther than usual. A novice suddenly knelt head to the floor, tears falling silently, soaking into the bricks like late rain. They didn't splash. They spread, then disappeared like sadness being kept for safekeeping by the earth. The air thinned, as if the room had taken a deep breath. From afar, the steady wooden fish rhythm of evening practice drifted down the corridor. Met the wind came into the room and stood still at the bed's head. A disciple rose on tiptoe to gently close the window a bit, so the curtain wouldn't flutter too hard. The sunlight gathered there and stopped drifting. By the bed, the Bodhi leaf trembled. Once, then lay still, like a period set in the right place. The disciple nearest lifted the prayer beads from the table edge and set them neatly into the old master's palm, so the sandalwood scent lingering there could go with the warmth that remained. Without being told, everyone stepped back half a pace, making room for the stillness to sit. That stillness was not mute sorrow. It was like a broad eve where a weary traveler stops, sets down their load, hears the wind pass, and feels their shoulders grow lighter. In the corner, the tea that had long gone cold still held its fragrance. A disciple poured a small cup and set it on the table, a habit unchanged, though they knew he would not lift it again. The simple act suddenly took on meaning. The habit continues, not because they forget, but because they remember his words. Just now, I am not going anywhere. In the room, that sentence still drifted like a thin thread of smoke. Whoever it touched, it sank into warming from the inside out. When the sun drew itself completely from the window frame, leaving only a thin silver strip like the back of a knife, the disciples all bowed together 3 times, slow and deep. The bow did not collapse. It was soft, rounded like a drop of water merging into a lake. From that day, no one relied on the familiar figure whenever they misspoke, slipped, or stumbled. Yet in each step, they still sensed a quiet guidance walking with them like the Bodhi wind that evening passed, but leaving its scent behind. Night fell. The courtyard cooled and the sky pulled a black cloth over the roof tiles. On the steps, a few dry leaves remained like letters fallen from a sentence already read. At the end of the corridor, the small room closed its door. Inside, bamboo bed, folded blanket, prayer beads, Bodhi leaf. Everything was in its place. Only one new thing, the space that had appeared, had also found its place inside each person, like a newly opened room, with no furniture and no sound, but a window looking out to a wide dome of sky. And in that room, the old master's last words remained gentle as a small lamp. I am not going anywhere. I'm only changing form, so you will no longer depend on me. Someone once witnessed a parting like this with their own eyes, and from then on, the way they looked at every relationship in life changed. We often think that if we lose the one we lean on, we will collapse. We fear losing parents, teachers, guides, as if losing the very ground of ourselves. But sometimes, it is exactly when the support is gone that a person truly begins to stand tall. Learning to stand when the support is gone, that is the final gift a teacher leaves. While present, a teacher is like a walking stick, a patch of shade, a boat carrying us through storms. But if we cling to the stick forever, we forget how to walk on our own legs. If we stay always in the shade, we'll never dare step into the sun. The old master's departure was not abandonment, but a letting the student stop relying. Modern life often teaches that we must always have a support, someone to ask, someone to decide for us, someone to save us whenever we stumble. So when that person is gone, it's like the ground beneath our feet is pulled away. But no one can stay with us forever, however deep the love, however close the bond. In the end, all must part. Separation is certain not a disaster, and it is precisely what helps people grow. Only when no one decides for us do we truly begin to learn to listen to ourselves. Only when no one lifts us up do we truly learn to stand after each fall. Only when no one draws the map do we dare feel our way step by step to find our own path. But people are afraid of parting. We grip every relationship, every support, as if letting go means falling into emptiness. And because we fear, we suffer when the unavoidable happens. But the truth is, all relationships must eventually be released. No one can walk with us our entire life. No teacher can lead a student forever. No parent can hold a child's hand forever. No partner can stay with us to the very end of time. All are temporary meetings on a long journey. At some point, everyone must step off so the train can continue. I once heard a Zen master say, "Love is not gripping each other tightly, but walking together for a stretch and smiling when it's time to let go. It sounds simple, but doing it takes great courage. The courage to accept that what is precious is also what cannot be kept. When we understand that we learn to love gently, without binding, without turning love into chains. That day before leaving, the old master chose to give his disciples a gift that cannot be wrapped in hands: emptiness. Because it was that very emptiness that forced them to step forward, to learn how to exist without relying on anyone else. In modern life, many people grow old in years, yet remain like children in spirit, simply because they have never lost a support. They've never had to stand up alone from wreckage, never had to find direction at a crossroads with no guide, never had to take full responsibility for themselves. But one cannot truly mature without once standing in that open space where there is no one to call, no hand to hold, no one to lift you. That moment, painful as it is, marks the beginning of a new life. Only when there is no one left to cling to do we realize our legs have always been enough to keep going. Someone once asked a Zen master, "How can I be less afraid when I must part with the person I rely on?" The master remembered the old master lying peacefully with a gentle smile and answered, "Understand that they do not leave to abandon us. They leave to return us to ourselves. A teacher doesn't live forever, so we can remain students forever. A father doesn't live forever, so we can remain small children forever. A guide doesn't live forever, so we can forever need to be led. They leave so we can grow up, so we learn to find light ourselves, instead of living forever under someone else's light." When we understand that separation is no longer loss, it becomes a rite of passage. That afternoon, after the old master closed his eyes, the temple sank into silence for days. Then, one by one, the disciples returned to daily tasks. One swept the yard, one lit incense, one taught the sutras. At first they trembled. Later they steadied. Gradually, they did everything only the old master had done before. No one stood at the front, yet each person stood up. No one pointed the way, yet everyone knew the path they walked. The old master was no longer present, and yet he was more present than ever in every firm step of those who had once been trembling students. And I understood this is how a true teacher takes leave, leaving not dependence, but strength. That afternoon, the autumn sun was as thin as a silk scarf laid over the mossy roof tiles of the monastery nestled in the pine forest. Wind blew down from the mountainside, touched the wind chimes hanging under the eaves, plucked out clear notes, then dissolved into the open air. The faint scent of pine resin mixed with the smoke of incense just burned out from the service blended into a warmth edged with chill, like the memory of very distant evenings. Down in the courtyard, the pines cast long shadows, chasing each other across the worn stone steps, marked by feet, then lay still like a gentle herd, finished with its roaming. The temple bell suddenly rang. Not urgent, not sad, just round and deep, dropping ring after ring into the valley. Each wave of sound went out like a ripple widening, touched the mountain walls, then returned light as air. In the meditation room at the end of the corridor, the wooden door was half ajar. Slanting sunlight pierced the fine dust hanging in the air like a flock of golden insects. The Zen master sat leaning against that windowsill. He had lived nearly a century, two wars many seasons of loss, countless lights and shadows of the human heart. His white hair was fine as smoke. His wrinkled skin was dry and brown like winter bark. But his eyes were still clear. The cool, deep clarity of a dewdrop on a lotus leaf at dawn, shining with a light that didn't belong to the sun. He wore a brown robe faded with age. His exposed wrist was thin and dry, yet when that hand rested on the window frame, the whole room seemed to quiet, as if some hidden order had just been set in place. The disciples stood around him. One held a notebook, one a strand of prayer beads. Another stood tucked into a corner. Everyone silent. Someone forced a sob back down. Someone pressed their lips until they went white, their eyes gleaming with tears not yet fallen. They knew what moment was approaching, quiet and non-negotiable. That moment was like a boat that had long been stored under a roof, pushed out onto the river today. A breeze slipped through the lattice. The boaty leaves before the eaves trembled, painting moving rings of light on the ground. From afar, the wooden fish block began to sound. The first beat touched the heart like a handhold. The master tilted his head to listen. He looked out at the last light of day touching the edge of the forest, a thin gold streak like a gentle blade. The corner of his mouth curved a smile as small as a comma, yet everyone nearby could see it. He spoke his voice, neither loud nor weak. "I'm only going to sleep a long sleep." Just those 4 words, a long sleep, and the whole room seemed to exhale. A tautness had its pin pulled, not collapsing, but softening. No one argued. No one asked more. What was there to ask when every question had been answered by the way he looked at that sunlight, unhurried, unattached, unafraid? He leaned over, pulled the frayed cotton pillow close and rested his head on his arm, like a traveler used to long roads. The movements were slow, distinct, unfumbled. The thin blanket was pulled up to his waist, its edge smoothed flat, like a tailor pressing a seam. He lay on his side facing the window, letting the last light touch his cheek lightly. His eyelids closed. The room shifted into a different quiet, the quiet of evening about to open its eyes. No lamenting, no elaborate last requests, no list of to-dos. Only the sound of the wind stroking the sill, the steady, long breathing, the scripture from the main hall flowing in like a small stream. By an unspoken pact, the disciples let their hands fall and let any tears, if there were, drop inside their chests and dissolve like salt into water. The youngest novice stepped back and turned toward the door. In the yard, a yellow leaf was falling, spun 3 times, and lay still on the stone step. He suddenly thought of the many times the old teacher snapped a plum in half and put it in his hand, saying, "Eat. It's a little sour, so you'll remember it longer." Winter mornings, when the master rose earlier than everyone, started the fire, his hands reddening from the flames. Long rainy afternoons, when he sat quietly without sleeping, eyes toward the dim mountains, as if listening to a soundless piece of music. All those fragments linked together not to narrate how he lived, but to show one thing. He lived simply like a monastery meal, and just as complete, always enough soup, enough greens, enough warmth. Closer by, an older disciple gently placed the sandalwood beads into the master's palm, so the scent of wood could go with the warmth that remained. Another eased the window shut a little to soften the wind. Someone poured tea. Each small act suddenly took on a ceremonial meaning, not to send him off by the book, but like helping a weary person unlace a pair of shoes more easily. Time became unhurried. The gold of the light shifted toward the color of ripe plums, then thinned as it drew back from the wall. The bright patch on the tiles shrank, touched the bed's edge, then withdrew, leaving the room with the warm gray of dusk. Outside, the pines changed tone, less ring, more depth. The wind chime fell silent, making room for the insects to test their voices. Everything seemed prearranged. When the time came, each did its part, no crowding, no fuss. The master turned over very lightly, like a fish flexing in water. His hand still rested on the blanket's edge. His thumb just touched his index finger, forming a tiny circle round as a new moon. His breathing grew more even deeper, then longer, like silk thread drawn from a cocoon. With each exhale, it felt as if the room widened a bit. Everyone sensed it. He was letting go part by part, not hurried, not lingering. Like folding a letter you've finished reading, smoothing the crease, setting it in a drawer, and nudging it closed. In that moment, a memory rose in one disciple's mind. Years ago, on an autumn afternoon, he'd had them sit quietly under the eaves, saying, "Listen to the sound of leaves falling." The students laughed. What sound could a leaf make? He didn't laugh, only said, "Listen long enough and you'll hear." They sat, and long after they did hear it, a sound as fine as thread, being drawn along wood. No one could record it, but anyone who heard it remembered. Now standing around the bamboo bed, they heard that sound again, the very light fall of something inside themselves, a fear, a habit of clinging, a shadow of reliance falling away and coming to rest quiet as that leaf outside. A thin breeze touched the closed eyelids, stirring two silver hairs. The master smiled once more, so slight that without looking with your whole heart, you'd think it wasn't there. The smile wasn't for anyone in the room in particular. It tilted toward the spent sunlight, toward the forest, toward the bell that had just ceased. It was a light period at the end of a long paragraph, neither harsh nor regretful. It said, "Enough." When the breath drew in to its deepest point, the whole room seemed to inhale with it. The next breath was as light as silk, brushing a tabletop, and then no more. Nothing snapped, only a further degree of stillness. No sob broke out. Only a few of those standing had their breathing fall out of step, like a unit changing legs in unison. No wail. Only the wooden fish in the main hall suddenly stopping, so a wide strip of sky could step into the meditation room. A young disciple burst into tears, but managed to cover his mouth. Tears fell onto the back of his hand, hot, spreading, then cool. The oldest person in the room lifted the blanket to the master's shoulder and smoothed it straight, like finishing a seam. They all bowed 3 times. The first bow heavy as stone, the second light as grass, the third without weight. When they stood, everyone felt their shoulders had changed shape. There was no longer room for panic to sit there. In its place was a space that fit exactly the space of responsibility, of stepping forward on one's own. Outside, the sky had turned violet. The first stars shyly pierced the thin clouds. The pine forest darkened, but not frighteningly more, like a large blanket. The wind tilted, carrying a very faint bodhi scent. In the yard, the novice picked up the yellow leaf, set it in his palm, then thought better of it, and laid it at the tree's base. He pressed it lightly with a fingertip, then drew back quickly, like sending a letter with no addressee. The disciples dispersed. No one said, From now on, there's no master. They went to do small things no one had assigned. One shut the window. One lit a small lamp on the corner table. One took a clean cloth and wiped the bed's edge. Everything returned to its place. Yet nothing was as before. Like a room freshly dusted, the furniture the same, but the air entirely different. Night settled fully. A new moon climbed above the pines, hanging a thin blade of light over the temple roof. On the white wall, the window frame's shadow slanted like a quick pen stroke. In the meditation room, the quiet was no longer fragile. It had taken root, gripping the brick floor, slipping into the wood grain, circling the bamboo bed. If someone stepped in now, they would think there was nothing in the room but a good sleep. And indeed, it was only a sleep. No drama, no storm, no final wave. A person had finished the day's shed excess baggage, hung the robe back on its hook, washed his face with the evening light, and lay down. Tomorrow morning the bell will ring again. Sunlight will pass through the fine dust like a swarm of golden bees. The disciples will go to the yard, sweep leaves, start the fire, open the main hall. They will sit where the master used to sit without the master, recite the same verses without his guiding voice. But in every movement there will be a new tempo, a different steadiness, as if someone were still there, not in the old form, but in how they stand. Straight, breathe evenly, smile at one another as they carry the pot of porridge to the veranda. For that afternoon said all that needed saying. Life doesn't require fanfare to close. A smile is enough. A sleep is enough. And the path from the eaves to the pine forest still waits for other footsteps to go on under the same sky, with the same gentle autumn breeze, like a thin scarf laid over the ancient tiles, never ceasing to be warm. That story reminds us death is not as frightening as we imagine. Modern society makes people fear death like a pitch-black abyss. We try to postpone it with medicine, surgery, endless future plans. We rarely speak of it, avoid it, as if not mentioning it would keep it from happening. But death walks beside each person every day, every hour, quietly, silently, like a shadow that never leaves our heels. And what causes suffering isn't death, it's the fear of death. The strange thing is, only when we know how to end gently do we truly live fully. Many people won't enjoy the present because they worry it will end. They clutch everything: love, youth, power, fame, like sand that slips faster the tighter it's held. So they never truly live. They live always fearing loss. But the Master taught there's no need to fear endings. It is the ending that makes each moment precious. If a sunset lasted forever, who would find it beautiful? If a flower never withered, who would cherish it? Precisely because we know everything will pass, we learn to live each thing fully while it's here. Only when we stop clinging to continuance do we know how to live. Only when we stop panicking to hold on do we dare savor each second we have. When we accept that this feast will end, we finally dance our hearts out to the music that's playing. So death is not life's enemy. It's the boundary that makes life valuable. Without endings, there are no beginnings. Without limits, there's no worth. Death quietly undergirds the meaning of every second we live. But to live fully, we must learn what the Master accomplished. To end gently, gently as setting a finished book back on the shelf. Gently as exhaling after a journey completed. Gently as closing your eyes after a long day. Not defeat, not resignation, simply a journey completed with a smile. And more important, still calmly welcoming every cycle. Life moves in circles: birth, aging, illness, death, and then birth again. Each person is only a tiny point in that endless flow. No one truly disappears. No one truly lasts forever. People suffer because they imagine themselves outside that circle. We want to be forever young, forever alive, forever victorious, forever enduring. And because we fight the natural current, we grow exhausted, despairing, shattered. But there's no need to fight. Just learn to flow like leaves in a stream, like clouds in the sky. Know where you are in the cycle and be at peace there. When it's time to arrive, live fully. When it's time to leave, go lightly. Like the master that day, no resistance, no struggle, no fear. Just lying down and sleeping. There's a very old saying, death is the first day off after a lifetime of hard work. It sounds like a joke, but it is deeply true. We have gone, run, worried, contended, been hurt, sacrificed, loved, and when all is complete, death comes like a final rest, gentle and well-deserved. No need to fear, no need to clutch, just a slight smile like someone so tired they finally lay their head on the pillow. That afternoon, the monastery bathed in pale light. The disciples still stood around the bed, tears falling, but no one sobbed aloud, because they knew their teacher hadn't gone anywhere. He was simply going to sleep a very long sleep. And when night fell, they went outside and looked up at the deep, star-filled sky. One star shone brighter than the rest, as if smiling. No longer a body, yet still present in every gaze, every step, every breath of those he had guided. And I understood this is how a true master leaves the world, not with noise, not with tragedy, not with tears, only with sleep. At dawn, the beach was still wet with the trace of last night's receding tide. Wave lines drew thousands of ripples across the sand, like the ocean's fingerprints stretching to the feet of dark rock outcrops, lying still, listening to the moisture. The sun had not fully risen, just a thin red blade above the horizon, enough to dust a pale gold along the edge of the waves. The strong scent of salt, fresh seaweed, and the must of weathered wood from a boat moored offshore mixed together, briny on the tongue. A flock of seagulls skimmed low, let out bright cries, then hurried upward as a sudden gust swept through. On that strip of sand, a small novice walked hunched along the path the tide had left. His thin brown robe clung to him with sea mist. Wide sleeves fluttered in the wind, revealing tiny sun-browned wrists. Bare feet stamped little prints, stopping now and then as he bent to pick up a seashell, a bit of coral, or a smooth stone like candy. Sand dotted his shins. The wind passing by sounded like someone whispering at his ear. He picked things up and dropped them into the old bamboo basket at his side. Each new piece made a crisp little clack. Suddenly, he froze. Right at the damp waterline lay a spiral shell, strangely beautiful. Its outer surface gleamed as if glazed pearly and iridescent, ringed with even patient whirls, as though someone had drawn them for a lifetime without blinking. At the tip sat a pale golden dot, like a drop of sunlight caught there. The novice bent down, pinched it lightly between two fingers, and lifted it. The shell's coolness against his skin made him shiver, as if he'd touched a secret kept in stone. He raised the shell to his ear and shook it very gently. No sound, no movement, only the ocean's low hum resonating through the cavity, whether he shook it or stood still. He tilted it, peering deep inside. Within was a clean, polished emptiness, as if an invisible hand had just wiped it. No little creature curled up, no tiny eyes looking back, no head poking out, no foot creeping, no soft door closing. He exhaled long, like a wave that crashes on rock and scatters, then withdraws in defeat. "It's dead," he murmured, voice dipping. A brown robe passed behind him, slow as wind. The master, who had been watching from a distance, left steady, deep prints in the sand. He stopped beside the boy, not speaking in haste. The first sunlight brushed the master's face, bringing out the lines around his eyes like summer-dried stream beds. He tilted his head to the shell in the child's hand, his gaze neither sad nor glad, only deep like water when the wind has gone still. "No," he said after a silence long enough to hear a clam's bubble pop under the sand. "It didn't die. It only left its old home, to seek the great sea." The novice looked up, eyes wide. Sea wind rushed by, flipping a tuft of hair onto his forehead. He turned the shell in his hand, looked again at the shining hollow, then out at the vast silvering ocean before him. The waves were gentle now, like an old water buffalo, chewing cud, heaving up and settling down, leaving fine white lace along the shore. To seek the great sea, the words dropped into his heart like a pebble into a well rippling outward. "To where?" "Master," he asked, voice small as shells knocking in the basket. The master didn't answer immediately. He bent, pinched up a wet grain of sand, and placed it in the boy's palm beside the shell. "Do you know where this grain of sand came from?" he asked. The boy shook his head. "It was once stone," the master said, worn down by wind and waves, ground smaller until it became sand. Then the sand entered an oyster and pricked it. The oyster coated it patiently day after day, month after month, until it became a pearl. Someone picked up that pearl and traded it for a little rice and salt. Rice feeds people. People grow new rice. Wind blows, rain falls, water evaporates. Clouds gather, rain falls again. It's the same with the snail. One day it leaves its old home, not to disappear, but to continue the journey of salt water in another form. The boy looked at the grain of sand in his palm, and suddenly it felt heavy like a story. He looked back into the shell. The inner sheen was so bright, it reflected his eye as a tiny dot. He pressed the shell to his ear again. The sea's sound ran around inside the universe, condensed into a spiral. Now it no longer sounded like empty silence as before. It was like a rounded whisper saying, "Go." But he still worried, leaving home. "Aren't you afraid?" The master smiled. His smile was thin as thread, used to stitch a hem torn by wind. "Did you ever lose your baby teeth?" he asked. "Yes." The boy nodded, tongue unconsciously touching the front tooth that had wobbled last year. "Were you afraid then?" "Yes, I was scared that if I lost my teeth, I couldn't bite cakes. But new teeth grew in. You can bite better than before," the master chuckled, eyes narrowing. "Homes are like that too. Some homes are only for a time. When the time comes, leaving isn't losing, leaving is growing." The wind picked up a little, drawing the water back a few handspans. In the sand, newly exposed crabs had scrawled crisscrossing tracks, mysterious letters of the sea. From a small tidal pool, a silvery fish flicked up, flashing like a freshly whetted blade. The novice still held the shell, his palm cooled by the ancient chill of dried seawater on it. "Master, if it's off to find the great sea, "What is the old home for?" he asked, his voice less sad. "To remember," said the master, "and to remind. Remind what remind us that once there was a tiny dweller here, one that lived through many moons and tides, that carried a piece of the sea within itself. When it left, the shell remained, so that whoever found it would know leaving isn't betrayal. Often leaving is loyalty to something deeper, loyalty to the great sea." The boy lifted the shell higher, letting the strengthening light pierce its thin glaze. The spirals stood out like a map leading offshore. He suddenly imagined in that deep sea the snail had become a portion of water slipping beneath a boat's belly, slapping rock, washing over the heels of another child, running along some far beach, rising as a haze at the horizon, gathering into a cloud, then returning as rain on the temple roof one night. To seek the great sea. Now, the phrase sounded not like a frightening riddle, but a very familiar invitation. The master looked at the boy, then out to sea, then crouched and traced a circle in the sand with his fingertip, then another, concentric rings like ripples from a pebble tossed into water. He set the shell in the middle. It lay on its side, opening toward the ocean. "You have two choices," he said. "You can put this shell in your basket, take it back, set it on your desk, and polish it every day. Or you can return it to the water." The boy looked at the bamboo basket already full of fines, then at the shell resting in the sand ring. He bit his lip. Somewhere inside, something taut called want to keep wrestled with something softer, called no to return. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind. When he opened them, he knew what he would do. "I want to return it," he said. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice did not. The master nodded, neither praising nor stopping him. He stepped back to clear the path from shell to sea. The novice knelt, cradled the shell in both hands at his chest like a bowl of water, and walked slowly. The sand sank under each step. The water touched his ankles cold to the point of numbness. A small wave slid up like a cat sniffing a new guest, then withdrew. He bent and set the shell down, mouth facing the deeper water. Then, as if answering an unspoken invitation, another wave rolled in. Not big, not urgent, just enough to touch the shell, lift it a little, turn it, and draw it out a few inches. The shell floated off like a tiny white boat, bobbed through 3 lines of foam, and vanished into the glitter. The boy stood still, toes gripping the sand, eyes following, until he saw nothing but bright droplets, like fallen stars from the heart of the sky. He turned back. The circle the master had drawn still remained, its outer edge blurring where a wave had licked it. In the center was nothing, only the shallow imprint of what once lay there. Strangely, that empty space didn't make him sad like when he'd held the shell. It was like an altar shelf after the incense bowl has been carried away to be cleaned clean, waiting full of promise. "How do you feel?" The master asked, same tone, with a hint of a smile. The boy looked at his wet, bare hands. Sand clung in the creases, staying behind like tiny letters the sea had written to him. A weight inside him seemed to lift so light a passing breeze could raise it. "I feel..." He searched for words as if I just opened a door. "I don't know where it leads, only that I shouldn't close it." The master chuckled softly, a short, crisp sound, like 2 dry shells tapping. "That's enough," he said. "Some doors only open with empty hands, and some things can only be returned once we no longer want to keep them." They walked along the water's edge for a while without speaking. The boy picked up a few broken shells, a couple of snapped coral bits. This time when they dropped into the basket, he didn't add a sigh of regret. On a hump of sand like a turtle's back, an old wooden boat lay overturned. The master set his hand on it, feeling the warmth of sun-soaked wood. Farther on, an old man hauled a net while his grandchild ran alongside, laughter scattering like salt. The wind carried that laughter over, touched the boy's ear, and left a strange sweetness. By the time they headed back toward the temple, the sun had climbed a notch. The sand shone brighter. The tide marks faded under new footprints. The boy glanced back once. Where the shell had floated off, there was no trace, but he felt as if a thin, bright line stretched to the horizon. He wasn't sure if he imagined it, but he didn't need to know. As the master had said, some doors only need to be opened. You don't have to see all the way through. Master, he asked, as they were about to leave the sand, if one day I also leave my home, will someone find my shell and remember? The master stopped and laid a hand on his shoulder, dry and warm, faintly scented with sandalwood. They will, he said, but it needn't be a shell. It might be a sentence you say when someone needs it, or a good deed you do and then forget, or a smile. Those are shells, two signs that let others know you once passed by. The boy nodded. They stepped onto the stone path to the temple. The casuarina trees received them with patchy shade and the resinous smell of sun. Overhead, seagulls circled again and cried twice as if in greeting. The boy tightened his grip on the basket strap. It felt lighter than on the way down. He realized lighter not because there was less, but because he was clinging less. Before turning onto the paved path, he looked back once more. The sea lay open like a giant eye that never closes. Somewhere out there, perhaps the shell had sunk beside a rock, snagged on a weed bed, or been pushed to some other shore. But he didn't want to know where it was. He only wanted to remember the words hanging them in his mind like a wind chime under the eaves. It didn't die. It only left its old home to seek the great sea. And suddenly, the ocean sounded different. No longer the roar of something devouring, but the breathing of something embracing. Wave after wave lapped and fell back like a mother's nod when her child can walk on his own. The novice smiled a small smile, yet strong like a cord tying him to this morning, to the home waiting on the hill, and to the great sea, just opened inside him wider than the horizon. That story reminds us, death is not an ending, but the beginning of a new journey. In modern society, many see death as a door slammed shut, a brutal end to everything. But the Buddha teaches nothing truly disappears. All things only change form, place, and conditions, like that snail leaving its shell on the shore to keep swimming into the vast sea. An empty shell is not proof of death. It is the trace of a rebirth. Thus, every ending opens a door. We often see endings as loss, as falling into emptiness. We panic each time a chapter closes, losing loved ones, losing a job, losing youth, losing position, losing what's familiar. But if you look closely, everything good in life began with an ending. A child must end childhood to grow up. A student must end school to enter life. One must end an old love to open the heart to a new one. And ultimately, a life must end this body to begin another journey. Death, then, is not a wall, but a door. Not an abyss, but a threshold to a new world. There was once a woman nearly 100 years old in her last days. She didn't cry, didn't worry, didn't clutch at anything anymore. She simply watched the sunlight fall through the window and smiled very softly. Her family gathered their voices. Tight asked, "Aren't you afraid, Mom?" She answered, voice light as waves from far away, "I'm just about to go home." Those words were as light as wind, yet stilled the whole room. No one said anything more. Sometimes, when just one person dares to see death as a homecoming, everyone who remains becomes less afraid. But to pass through that door requires one thing: to let go of fear and step into the unknown. That is the hardest part. Humans fear what they've never seen. We're used to the shore, so we fear the deep. Used to light, we fear darkness. Used to noise, we fear silence. And death, the greatest silence, deepest ocean, widest night, so we fear it. But in truth, every great thing in life was once unknown the first time we touched it. We feared our first steps, but by stepping, we learned to walk. Feared our first day of school, but by going, we learned to read. Feared our first love, but by daring, we learned to care. So why not see death as a new adventure, the last one, and also the vastest? A Zen master once said, "Don't call it dying, call it putting out to sea." Simple as it sounds, that sentence can change how we see parting. Putting out to sea isn't vanishing. The one who leaves only slips beyond our sight, still living in another form, another dimension, another ocean. Like the snail, we see only the shell and mistake it for death. But in truth, it swims far, living a life broader than we could imagine. Modern society often teaches us to cling to the familiar, to hold everything tight, to shut old doors and block every outlet, as if staying put were safety. But staying put isn't living. Only by daring to shed an old shell can we find our ocean. So if someday you must part with a person, a phase, a body, remember the shell on the shore. And remind yourself, they have not been lost. They have only gone to seek the great sea. That afternoon, the novice still stood on the sand, the shell in his hand. The master had walked on his footprints, fading on the wet beach. The sea wind tossed the boy's hair, and for the first time he smiled. He wasn't sad anymore, because he understood. The shell is empty not because the snail died, but because it was brave enough to step into the unknown. And perhaps someday we all must do the same, leave this shell on the shore and set out to sea to find our own ocean. That autumn came earlier than usual. It was only late August, yet the wind already carried a chill across the nape, making the lake on the hillside ripple with small waves. The sky was crystal clear, like a freshly washed mirror. The clouds sparse and high. Sunlight slanted down thick and golden, like honey poured over the mossy roof tiles of the temple, glinting on dust motes drifting across the corridor. Along the stone path leading to the three-gate entrance, the Bodhi trees stood in 2 rows, like 2 lines of ancient letters. Their leaves had begun to change color, green turning to yellow, yellow shading into brown, rustling in the wind, as if sharing a secret conversation. When they left the branches, they didn't fall in a sulking downpour. Each leaf chose its own trajectory, slowly spinning in the air and landing on the moss-covered brick courtyard with a sound as thin as a stifled sigh. By the east veranda, a young novice leaned against a wooden pillar, wrapping his brown sleeves around himself against the cold. To his eyes, the temple courtyard looked as if someone had spread a carpet over it. Nothing but a gentle golden hue. He stepped down a stair and bent to pick up a leaf, still perfectly heart-shaped, lifting it up to eye level. On its surface, fine veins stood out in the light like old blood vessels. He stroked it lightly. His finger touched the dry, brittle surface with a faint crackle. A soft breath slipped out, carrying a thought tinged with both sadness and tenderness. Poor thing. Each of these leaves lived through a brilliant summer, and now all that's left is a dry husk. The wind pushed the door, and it creaked. From the far end of the corridor, the master walked over unhurriedly. His long brown robe brushed the brick floor, leaving a dark trail that quickly faded. He didn't answer right away. He bent to pick up a leaf at his feet, looked at it for a moment, then placed it into an old bamboo basket set beside him. The basket's mouth was wide. The rim had been bleached by the sun, the bamboo slats gray like finger bones. The master quietly walked along the courtyard, slowly picking up one leaf, then another. His rough, dry hands lifted each one as if cradling a fragile keepsake. The novice fumbled along behind him, unsure what to say, hearing only the crisp, crackling clicks of leaves touching each other in the basket, a strange kind of background music for that autumn afternoon. By late afternoon, when the sunlight had slid off the main hall's roof and lay lightly on the west veranda, the master told the novice to carry the basket to the back garden. It was tucked behind the monks' quarters at the far end of the temple, among vegetable beds and a few fruit trees planted at the start of spring. The soil there was dark and loose-smelling of old rain. The master piled the leaves into a mound roughly waist-high. He sat down, chose a few dry twigs, set up a small tent for the fire, and struck a spark with stones. One tiny glow flared and died, then another. On the third try, it caught on a straw, reddened, crawled to the leaves, then bit into the wood. The fire rose into warm orange flames like the inside of a freshly cut persimmon. The light gently lapped at the master's face, bringing out the wrinkles like narrow, winding paths that had weathered many seasons. The novice stood by, hugging the empty basket, not daring to blink. The fire slowly ate into the yellow leaves. They shrank, curled, then snapped like slender arms waving a last goodbye. Thin smoke rose, the faint earthy scent of dry leaves mixing with the smell of burning wood, breathing a sense of ripeness into the afternoon. A light breeze carried the smoke toward the banana grove at the far end, where it passed through a mint bush, picked up a cool fragrance, then drifted back to enfold the two of them. The novice inhaled unconsciously and found that within the smoke was the smell of coming cold, of dying sunlight, of earth preparing to sprout. The master used a small stick to stir the pile so the fire would spread evenly. He didn't burn everything at once, but let the flames consume thin layers like someone slowly reading a book they love page by page. When the flames were no longer greedy and only red embers like cat's eyes in the dark remained, he used a metal shovel to push the fire aside and waited for the leaves to finish burning. A few minutes later, only ash remained, fine as powder gray as dawn mist. The master took a wooden ladle and scooped the ash into a small winnowing basket. He handed one to the novice, then took another for himself. The two of them walked along the rows of young trees, little jackfruit, young oranges, a few starfruit trunks just budding, and a whole line of newly rooted tea bushes. At each base, the master sprinkled a thin layer of ash as lightly as sesame seeds over a morning sticky rice bowl, patting the soil so the ash wouldn't blow away. The ash lifted with each flick of the hand, dissolving in the evening light like hurried letters tossed into the wind. A little clung to the master's sleeves, a little kissed the novice's cheeks, leaving faint smudges. The boy wiped his face. A gray streak stained his index finger. He chuckled softly, and the sadness he'd had earlier seemed to drop somewhere he couldn't see. "Master," he blurted out, eyes still following the falling flecks of ash. "So, they're truly gone, aren't they?" The master paused, looked at him, then down at the sapling just dusted with ash. There, the dark earth was like a thick new coat. The gray ash lay over it like a shawl. He tilted his head, as if listening for something very small beneath the surface. "Leaves don't die," he said slowly, his voice low like night wind passing a thatched roof. "They're just returning to nourish new shoots." The novice looked up, his deep black eyes reflecting a faint glow from the embers still visible in the distant ash pile. Returning, those two words entered him not through his ears, but through the smoke still lingering at his temples, through the warmth in his palms, holding the ash basket, through the fact he had just watched a layer of leaves become a layer of nourishment. He bent down and touched the soil around a tea bush. His palm received a new warmth. "So," he hesitated, "everything that falls away returns." The master smiled gently, the smile opening as slowly as a late bloom. "Yes, but returning isn't only back to earth. Some return as fragrance and go with the wind. Some return as color and linger on the evening sky a while. Some return as memory and live in the eyes of those who saw them. Leaves return to feed the tree. People return to nourish people through the good they've sown." The novice nodded. Suddenly, he remembered summer noons, these very leaves pulsing above him, weaving shade over the courtyard, sheltering sun-weary pilgrims resting. He remembered the rustle that followed each of the master's steps, the faint scent of Bodhi leaves blended with evening incense. It turned out they had given an entire summer, and now they continued to give, only in a different way, through ash. They finished sprinkling the 2 baskets of ash around the young trees. The master set down the ladle, straightened, and brushed his back lightly. In the sky, a cloud shaped like a beached boat drifted slowly toward the mountains. The wind was cooler, but in the garden, a quiet warmth was spreading beneath the soil, something the eye could not see, but the heart could guess. Tender roots would find their way to the ash, take it in, and grow. "Tomorrow, water them once more," the master said, as if speaking of an ordinary small task. "Ash settles quickly when it meets water easier for the roots to drink." "Yes," the novice replied, his voice sounding as if it had grown a little older. On their way back to the courtyard, they passed the still warm ash heap. The master prodded it lightly with his stick. A few bright coals glowed within. He bent down, scooped a handful of ash, and blew gently. The ash lifted, catching the evening light and sparkling like a flock of gray fireflies. Then it fell soft light, as if someone were placing each grain where it belonged. The novice watched a string of images rising in his mind: the lush green leaf of May, the yellow leaf of August, the warm flames of this afternoon, gray ash sprinkled around roots, and next spring's buds breaking through the soil, carrying a fresh scent of Bodhi leaves. perfect cycle. Nowhere was an ending. Suddenly, his earlier words, only a dry husk, felt hasty, like someone arriving in the middle of a story and rushing to pronounce the ending. The master patted his shoulder, his hand dry yet warm. "Sadness is fine," he said. "Sadness shows you love. But don't let it blur your eyes to the cycle. Look closely, and you'll see nothing is taken away. It only changes place, changes form." He looked over the temple courtyard where leaves were still falling, but now each one seemed to have a clear destination. In a corner, another novice was gathering a new pile. The bamboo broom's steady swish sounded like a background score for a fading afternoon. From the main hall, chanting swelled and ebbed, soaking through the wooden walls, out to the veranda, into the garden, and then into the wind. Everything was moving, not noisily, not sluggishly. By the time they returned to the east veranda, the sky had dimmed. The master sat on the step, pulled his robe over his knees, and gazed across the courtyard past the Bodhi rows to the gate where a traveler's silhouette was closing. He said nothing more. The novice sat one step below, hands on his knees, his heart suddenly as calm as a lake just stilled. He looked at the leaf he had held. A dried, heart-shaped leaf hesitated, then set it on the sill under a small stone instead of taking it back to his room as usual. He wanted to leave it there so that in the morning the wind could lift it and carry it a bit farther to wherever it needed to go. A bell rang round and far. A thin darkness like mist began to settle over the garden. Somewhere behind the trees, crickets started their rhythm. The chill slipped over the veranda like a night cat finding a place to lie. The master stood, coughed softly, and went inside with measured steps. The novice rose too, but before entering, he glanced back at the courtyard. Leaves kept falling, but he no longer heard a sigh. Instead, he heard the earth receiving them, a soft, discreet sound, like the earth saying to the leaves, "I understand." And as he gently closed the wooden door, he knew that from now on, each autumn sweep would weigh less in his hands, because he had seen the leaves' path not from tree to ground to be finished, but from tree to ground to begin. Tomorrow's ash would be the day after's flowers. Today's sorrow would be the seed of another tenderness. What leaves us doesn't vanish. It only changes form to nourish what's to come. Outside, the night wind rose and lifted one last veil of ash from the garden into the air. In the day's dying light, it shimmered, curled into the dark, and dissolved without a trace. But in the soil around the young trees, a warm quiet was seeping in, the promise of spring signed in gray. And the master's words, spoken like the night wind, still echoed under the eaves. Leaves don't die. They're just returning to nourish new shoots. In modern society, death is often seen as a dark dividing line, an absolute ending, a disappearance that nothing can make up for. When someone goes, those left behind drown in a sense of loss, as if a piece of the world has collapsed. We imagine that when someone dies, everything where they once were present will also vanish. But in truth, nature has never wasted anything. Every fallen leaf, every withered flower, every rotting branch quietly returns to the earth, becoming nourishment so that the next season can sprout. Nothing truly disappears. It only changes form and continues to feed life. Death is not an ending, but becoming part of the cycle, quiet, humble, yet indispensable. Thus, the departed have not truly left this world. They have become an invisible part of all that lives in a drop of water, a ray of sunlight, a branch in the breath of those they loved. Death does not sever life, it continues life in another form. Yet for people, the pain of loss is real. That pain can't be denied nor hastily brushed aside. When a loved one leaves the void, they leave often feels so wide that nothing can fill it. Someone once told of a young woman who lost her mother. For weeks after the funeral, she nearly vanished from the world. No speaking, no visitors, just sitting silently in her room, hands trembling around old photographs. Then one day, she quietly took all those pictures to the backyard, lit a small fire, burned them to ash, and sprinkled that thin layer of ash around the pot of flowers her mother had tended every morning. Weeks later, the flowers bloomed more brilliantly than ever. As if singing something in color, she stood there with tears streaming the corners of her mouth, bending into a gentle smile. In that moment, she no longer felt her mother had gone, but as if she was still present in every petal, in each hue, in the faint fragrance of every dawn. From that moment, one thing became clear. Pain isn't meant to be buried, but transformed into nourishment. Grief is a natural response to loss, but if we hold it tight forever, it becomes a chain. If we can set it down, let it sink into the earth like leaf ash, it becomes fertile soil for our hearts to mature. When we can turn sorrow into sustenance, we not only move through loss, we grow from it. Like a forest of yellow leaves seemingly only decay, but that very layer is feeding the whole forest. Its nourishment is quiet, unshowy, needing no witness. Just like the love of those who have passed without form, yet present in every small thing around us. Modern society often teaches us to defeat time, resist aging, fear death. But the more we resist, the more exhausted, despairing, and anxious we become. If we can see life as a four-season forest, we will calmly welcome each cycle, spring's sprouting, summer's brilliance, autumn's fading, winter's stillness, so that spring can return. And death is just another season in life's journey. Not dark, not frightening, not a period at the end. Only a quiet winter, so another spring can take hold. That afternoon, after the ash was scattered around the roots, the novice stood gazing for a long time. The autumn wind blew, lifting the tiny ash specks, still clinging to his hands, into the air. They dissolved and then glittered under the sun like golden dust. He suddenly realized those leaves hadn't disappeared. They'd only changed form to keep living in every drop of new sap that would rise through the tree next spring. And I understood that this is what the Master meant to teach. Seeing the cycle lessens our fear, because nothing truly disappears. It is only returning to keep nourishing life. We have just journeyed quietly yet deeply through Zen stories of old, where each small image holds a vast truth about the cycle of birth, aging, illness, death. From the tender leaf leaving the branch to feed new buds, to the final candle silently passing on its light. All like little mirrors reflecting a simple truth we often forget amid our hurried lives. Life never vanishes. It only transforms. The Buddha taught that a human life is like a river. The water never disappears. It only changes form, place, and conditions. Every meeting is a fortunate condition. Every parting is a reminder of impermanence. Every loss is soil where new life can sprout. And death, the thing modern people fear most, is not a period at the end, but a door opening onto a vaster journey. When we understand this, we no longer need to live in fear, cling to fragile forms, or rush to chase immortality. We only need to live each moment, fully light the hearts we touch, and sow seeds of kindness into the soil of life. Because one day this body will fall away, but the light we leave behind will keep traveling through those we once warmed with our compassion, wisdom, and sincere presence. If these stories touched your heart and planted a seed of peace within you, please subscribe to the Buddhism Seeds channel. Share this video so that light can reach more hearts, and leave a comment below about what moved you most on this journey. Who knows? Your words might be the first candle to light the night in someone's heart who needs it.